Welcome to Manhwa Recaps, spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. The manhwa starts off with a rundown city, and a man sighing. Saying he's annoyed, he walks forward while looking around, asking why something or someone is fleeing all the way to here. He sees some dogs munching a body. Then he says found him, but looks like he's become a Scooby snack. The man says this is a spectacle. A window pops up saying the dogs are staring at him, and their names are just numbers. The man sighs saying their naming sense is horrible. The dogs howl then all leap at the man. As they go to swipe him, he activates two abilities, addition and multiplication buffs for his damage, slicing the monster's heads off. A bit later we see a giant gate. The man bangs on it saying to open up, and we're introduced to a hard mode player named Jung-gun. Just gonna call him June. He's happy to see the man, and the man says he's annoyed that he needs to keep doing stuff like this, and asks if someone else can do it. June says he's the only one who can do it, then asks where the guy he was meant to get is. The man says he was turned into a chew toy. June is surprised because the dead dude was a hard mode player. The man says the monsters were AA ranked. June is surprised and thankfully explains to us how 1A ranked monster can kill a hard mode player. So 3 of them is dangerous. June asks where the monsters are, and the man says he killed them all. June says alright, and the man says it's time to go eat. Then June says he can be honest, and tell him that he isn't an easy mode player and he'd believe it. We finally learn the man's name is Kang Taizan. Of course he's an easy mode player. Taizan tells him that he can just ask any of the other people who exited the labyrinth with him. June says all the other easy mode players are dead, and the ones who do appear just die instantly. June asks how an easy mode player even survived here, saying that even the normal and hard mode players are struggling. June says it's crazy how strong Taizan is since he's a hard mode player, but doesn't even compare to him. Taizan thinks for a second, then tells him they just half-ass their clear, and they walk off together. At the cafeteria, which is just a nasty tent, Taizan asks why they keep only eating potatoes. June says they are the most cost-efficient for them to make with their simple cultivation skill. June asks him if he really didn't learn the cultivation skill. Taizan says of course not since they always had food in easy mode. They hear some people fighting outside. Taizan says it seems like another person cleared the labyrinth, and he's sure he'll be apprehended soon. June says he's a hard mode player so Taizan might need to step up. Someone else tells Taizan to quickly help. The player outside is going crazy asking how this is meant to be Earth, saying this must be a prank. Taizan opens the tent asking where Li Tian is, Yen for short. She's out on a mission. An alderman approaches the Mulder and tells him he needs to calm down and listen. But he gets punched in the face. Taizan says he'll deal with it, then warns June if he eats his food he'll kill him. Taizan tells the man that this is the reality of Earth now. The man replies saying there's no way this is Earth. Asking how they didn't beat a few monsters. Taizan explains how most players who return go crazy because they can't accept the reality of Earth. It happens quite a lot, and it isn't easy for them to accept. Taizan sighs, then says he just needs to beat the shit out of the man. He asks for his name to send a battle request, and the man tells him his name is Li Changchun, and asks who he is. Taizan tells him, and the guy flames him saying he's just an easy mode player who spammed the community board. And asks if he doesn't know the difference between them will be as wide as heaven and hell. Taizan says to shut up and fight, as he's getting bored. Changchun gets annoyed and draws his sword saying not to blame him if he dies, then puts a lot of buffs on his blade, you know the drill. The other players see he's used augmentation and power strike, and say he's strong. Changchun quickly dashes towards Taizan swinging at him. It creates a massive explosion from it hitting Taizan. But Taizan has an ability to completely nullify the first strike, so he receives 0 damage. Changchun is surprised. As the smoke from the attack begins to settle, we see Taizan actually caught his blade with his hands. Changchun says he's never heard of such a broken skill, and struggles to pull his blade back. Taizan says it's his turn, and swings at him. Changchun's skill blocks half of the damage, but of course Taizan has a skill to do true damage. Dealing 49 damage to Changchun. He sees how little damage it did and is relieved saying that he won't be able to make up the stat difference. Taizan says his health is probably over 10,000, right? And then he doubles his damage, then squares it. Big maths. Changchun says to wait, Taizan says to shut up. Then lightly taps him on the back of the head. It instantly shoves him straight into the ground with so much force it breaks the ground apart like an earthquake hit. Dealing 9,600 damage, or generational brain damage, Taizan says hopefully he understands now, this is real. Changchun screams, and struggles to get up, saying to stop screwing with him. He begins to cry, asking why the world is like that, and says it'd have been better if he didn't clear the labyrinth. Now we get some world lore. It was peaceful and then suddenly the sky split apart and monsters began to pour out of it. You guys know how it goes by now. Humans were then given choices between easy, normal, hard, and solo modes. For their labyrinth difficulty, after clearing it on that difficulty they could return to Earth. But nobody expected it to be on the verge of destruction from all of the monsters. Tyson says he needs to wake up, and realize their only choice now is to save the world. June tells him good work. Tyson is surprised he actually watched. June says he's incredible for one-shotting a hard mode player. Tyson asks what's special about beating a weakling. June says he's just him. Then asks how he got the multiplication skill. And then asks about the true damage skill, and the other cheat-like skill to block the first hit. He asks how he got such unique skills. Tyson says through hard work. Then they hear some people going pog crazy, and wonder if another new player arrived. We see a woman walking away from boxes full of materials, and that's Yun who was mentioned previously. It cuts to Tyson looking at some kind of dinosaur fossil, or monsterite. He's low-key annoyed that she's still worried about decorations even while humanity is becoming extinct. We see the Last Supper, and he says all of this is only possible because of the fact she is the only person to have cleared solo mode. He asks why a woman like her is the strongest in the world, and we see her sitting in a chair. She says that this is her hobby, and maybe he needs to get a hobby too. He says they can talk about it when they have time, and asks why she wanted him here. She says she heard about what happened, and she always finds it weird to hear him bodying hard mode players. We see her stats are hella high, at least 5 times the hard mode players, but her status says she is scared. He asks if she's bragging. She says that she's just checking something, and to open his stats too. We see that her stats are infinitely higher than his are. She says he's as weak as expected. He asks if she's picking a fight, and she says it was just a stray. But his stats are really good for an easy mode player. We finally get some more world lore, about the difficulty. As soon as a player leaves the labyrinth they cannot grow anymore, which is why there are such differences between the players. A normal hard mode player has 10 times Tyson's stats, but none of them could endure a single blow from him. Which is of course due to his cheat skills. She tells him to stay still for a moment and begins to imbue power into a pen. She used augmentation and doubles her attack, and an ability to guarantee the attack will hit. She slashes at him. Tyson doesn't bother moving, but the attack just goes through him anyway. We learn skills can be obtained regardless of difficulty, and of course his are broken. He asks why she did that. As the attack was nullified it did 0 damage. She says she just wanted to do it. She starts to say some of his skills, and asks how many he has. He tells her he has around 230 skills. She says that she wishes the rest explored and tried to develop as many skills as he did. He tells her it's all in the past. She says that isn't necessarily the case, and they might have been able to win if he played in solo mode. Since even though his skills are strong, most of them use his stats as a base. Many players regret that he was only an easy mode player. He tells her to stop talking about it, and get to her point. She says alright, and that the next wave will begin soon. He realizes that means they are screwed, and explains a bit how during waves the mobs attack in hordes. Humanity lost soul in the first wave, half of the hard mode players died during the second wave, and they only managed to protect a small city during the third wave. And now it's time for the fourth wave. He asks her how many. She tells him there will be 2 S ranks, an apostle and of course A and B rank monsters. Tyson thinks about how even Yun struggles against S ranks, and they are short on people who can deal with E ranks. But there's an apostle too. He wonders if this is even doable, and she tells him to fight the 2 S ranks. He asks if she wants him to die, and she says that he's the only who can do it. Since she has to fight the apostle. He goes to leave saying she's a pain. She asks if he's going to tell the rest. He says they need to be prepared, and asks if she wants them not to know. She says it may be the happier option. He says he disagrees. Then he leaves. She says that she knows he's strong, and he could lead them to victory. Then she calls herself a coward while holding a purple stone. It jumps to June saying damn, and we hear a lot of people crying and screaming. Tyson asks June how he's feeling, and he says he's accepted it and they've already lasted longer than he thought, and this is a blessing so far. Tyson says blessing my ass, he's going to die. He sees Chang Chun down below them. June says poor guy. He must have suffered so much after clearing the labyrinth only to immediately have to deal with it again. then asks Tyson how he's feeling about this. He says he knows he's probably the angriest one here, since if anyone else tried half as hard as he did, humanity would be fine. Tyson says yeah, he's hella mad that they laze through the labyrinth. A crack appears, and monsters begin to pour out from it. Like a lot of monsters. June says that's nuts, and asks Tyson what he's fighting. He tells him about the S ranks. June says he'll see him in the afterlife, and that Tyson is for sure dying first, so wait for him there. Tyson says sure, then uses a skill called Large Leap to jump off the wall. As he soars in the sky above the city, he uses a skill to survey the area, and he sees on his minimap where the enemies are. He spots 2 dots that are different from the rest, which means they are the S ranks. He lands between the both of them, and asks if they are ready. Status windows begin to appear checking for fear and instant death, but he passes all the checks. Which activates a skill called Iron Will. He readies himself, and tells the monsters it's time to start. He walks towards the monsters, and says he hopes they aren't the defensive type. He used a skill to check, and of course Monster 7 is a defensive type with 148 million health. It jumps up then body slams straight into the ground, landing where Tyson was. He dodges using time acceleration, and says this is going to take forever. Then he wonders what type the other monster. Its name is Monster 5 and it's a long-range attack type, it only has 1 million health. He says that's doable, then swings its tentacles at him. He quickly evades each tentacle while slicing them repeatedly. Each slice is only doing 30 to 40 damage a hit. He realizes the tentacles have damage reduction, so he leaps towards 5's head. 5 notices this and starts to cast a beam with its tentacle, completely blasting everything in front of it. Of course our cheat like Tyson takes no damage, but realizes dodging that will be impossible. Unless he predicts the trajectory, which he does. He starts to fluidly dodge all of the skill shots, and dives straight back into 5, saying that he cannot drag this out any longer. He stabs it in the head dealing 50 damage, but 5 starts to zap him, and it hits Tyson. But his ability nullifies the second attack too, and the monster is surprised wondering where he is. Only to look up and find Tyson about to strike. But 7 jumps in front of him, and he realizes this is why they came out together. The ranged one hides behind the defensive type. But he doesn't care, he taps 7 and activates a battle skill, which puts a barrier up around them. 5 goes to blast, but we see it's useless. As only 7 can attack Tyson for the next minute. He thinks about how easy it would be if Yun were here since she has hella stats and legendary gear. He activates Big Math on his sword, and his true damage. He explains that Yun would just kill 5 and then slowly kill 7 after. But he cannot do that, since if he actually takes any damage he'll just be dead. He realizes he won't do enough damage, so he uses a skill to reset his skill for multiplication, which will allow him to deal a ton of damage. He dives straight into 7's mouth, and says 9,600 squared still won't be enough, so he activates a skill to let his next attack hit twice. And he stabs 7, dealing 92 million damage, and then the second attack does the same amount, instantly killing it. 5 takes the chance to attack him, dealing 22,000 damage to him, but he has a skill that allows him to ignore a fatal attack, and reduces all incoming damage to 0 for 5 seconds. He begins to stagger, but now he's out of big attacks. He stabs 5, and says the plan is simple, dodge then attack then repeat. But the problem here is that he only has 20 MP left, so he can only use basic attacks now. With 5 having 1.2 million health, and each attack only doing 48, he has to attack it 25,000 times. We see the day shift to night, and slowly but surely 5's health begins to decrease as he slowly fights it. He finally gets it to 100,000 left, and is hella gassed out. But lets out a roar, and continues the fight. A window appears saying that he's in a complete state of concentration, and his mind and body are one. And that a power has been imprinted on his soul, so he's obtained a soul skill called Soul Quality Increase, but since he's already out of the labyrinth the skill gets sealed. He tells the window to shut up, and we see 5 barely alive. He stabs it between the eyes one final time, killing the monster. Tyson struggles to remain standing, and a window says the gods are in astonishment at his feat. Tyson ignores it, and wonders how long he's been fighting for. Saying it felt like it's been a month, with his legs shaking, he slowly drags himself away from the fight, and starts heading back to their base camp. After some time he sees on the minimap one giant red dot, and that the base is in complete ruin with nothing but bodies around. He says they bragged so hard about being hard mode players, so why is the easy mode player the only one left? Why did he have to win only to find them all dead? He finds June's corpse, and says it looks like he wasn't the first to die after all, and he starts to feel survivor's guilt. With a gloomy look he sees a corpse that's been crushed into a wall. It's none other than Yun, who died while fighting the apostle. The apostle begins to form on the floor in front of her body, and starts to rise up. The gooey mess begins to turn into a different form, and the status window is full of errors. Tyson says he's tired of the window already, and he resists the apostle's instant death check. Then he stabs the apostle in the side, and grits his teeth. Then shouts saying to bring it on. Tyson stands there after stabbing him, then realizes he's screwed as a red circle appears below him, then stabs him in the chest. He says this is how it ends. He lands back on the ground, and a window says he'll be forcibly kept alive for a minute. He wishes they'd just let him die in peace. Since he can't feel his lower half anymore, his spine must have been severed. Fortitude only delays his death, it doesn't heal him. The apostle goes over Yun's body, and Tyson says damn, since he knows he's done for. And he starts to regret choosing easy mode. A crack appears in the sky and a hand begins to come out of it. Tyson says no, then starts to crawl forward while crying blood. He starts to think about how everyone else should have tried half as hard as he did. Then they might have not had to struggle in vain up until the end. He starts to lose consciousness and stops moving. He says the past is the past. He should just accept it, as there's no use in blaming others. This is where it all ends for the world. Inside of Yun's hands the purple gem begins to glow. He sees then as he's passing out, and he realizes she died trying to protect it. He starts to crawl forward again, and tells the apostle to wait there. He activates a skill called Last Chance, so he can use one skill now. He activates Time Stop, and begins to crawl forward during the 2-minute duration and opens Yun's hand. The stone is called the Ouroboros Bezoar. It can turn back the time of someone just once. He's surprised, and wonders why Yun had this with her. The crack in the sky opens more, and Tyson resolves himself to use it and says see you later bitch. As the giant monster goes to eat him, he activates the Bezoar. He sees himself when he was young, and how he was cursed by his parents for being born. They'd use him to relieve their stress. He always thought he had no worth, which is what led him to choose easy mode. But now he understands his talent, and his own worth. So he won't make the same mistake. He opens his eyes, and is surprised to find himself in his rundown apartment that's full of trash. He grabs onto his phone, and sees that it's still New Year's Eve, and tomorrow is when the labyrinth will open. He somehow finds pizza and is munching it. He's glad to finally eat something that isn't a potato. He starts to think about why Yun would have this item, and why she didn't even use it. Since Yun was a coward who always ran away, he opens his door to go outside. And says it's almost time, and that everyone in the world must be counting down right now. Thinking that things are about to get better for them, but in reality it couldn't be further from the truth. A crack appears in the sky, and the civilians wonder what's going on. We see a monster begin to come out of the crack. Tyson looks up at it and says it's just a B-rank monster, but it's time to start. The status window appears and says that their world will be destroyed by invaders, and the weapons they have now will not be of use against them. They start to cover it on the news. The window says do not worry, as a merciful being has taken pity on them, and has decided to give humanity a chance. They will all be able to choose and enter the labyrinth, clear it, and earn the power to save the world. Tyson says this isn't mercy, it's just entertainment for the gods. He goes to pick his mode, and says it's time to head out now. We get a little more world lore. Easy mode, they are blessed with food and rest areas, and even frail people can clear with little effort. Normal mode, food is rarer and there are less rest areas, but as long as you don't fall into despair you can clear it. Hard mode, the food and rest areas are really lacking and monsters will throw their lives away to kill you. Unless you get some form of safety you will not clear it. Then finally, solo mode. It's a mode where you are alone, you cannot meet anyone from your world. The only things you can see are hostile beings, monsters and normal NPCs. It will require luck, talent, wisdom and strategy. The window tries to warn him not to pick solo mode, but he ignores it saying to wait for him. Then picks it and enters the labyrinth. He's teleported into the middle of a city. He looks around the city and sighs saying he's returned here once again. He instantly sees a message on the community board. It's someone named Kang John Hyok, Yoke for short. Tyson says he's surprised there's a post, and the man is quick-witted. Tyson tells him good luck and that's it. He says there's no point in using the board now, and he'll use it later. He says he has something to check, and he recalls talking to Yun about the NPCs. In easy mode they just repeated their answers. He asks what they were like in solo mode, and Yun said they acted freely like they were real people. We see a man sleeping against a wall. Tyson says he's the gatekeeper of the labyrinth. But in the other modes he was an older man. The gatekeeper says he's surprised someone is here, he thought it would take at least a month. Taizen can instinctively feel how strong the gatekeeper is, and that he's stronger than Yun. The man introduces himself as Broken Man. Taizen asks about his name. And Broke explains that those who fail their attempts become gatekeepers. But he guesses that Taizen heard the gist of it outside. His world is facing destruction by invaders. It's an opportunity the Transcendent is giving them. Broke says that just being annihilated would have led to a happier ending. Taizen thinks that the NPCs in this world have come from worlds that have already been destroyed. Broke notices that Taizen is unnaturally calm, and wonders why he isn't just freaking out. He was planning to beat him up, but now he's not showing a response. Broke says some people call it a tower, others a labyrinth that doesn't matter. There are 100 floors, and every 10 floors it changes majorly. He'll have to deal with food and water himself, and find information out himself as well. Taizen asks if that's all. Broke asks if he wants to explain the floors individually, saying he can buy info from someone inside. Taizen recalls Yun warning him that the gatekeeper was annoying and that he beat her up. Which is why he's not saying anything. Broke starts to make a rift with his fingers, saying he'll explain the basics. He pulls some stuff out of it, including a spear, which he swings at Taizen. But he intentionally misses and waits to see how Taizen reacts to it, but he doesn't show any reaction. Broke smiles, and says take it, handing a sword and some armor to Taizen. Who tells Broke that it's copper, which annoys him. But then he starts to think about something. Taizen asks what it is, but Broke says it's nothing. Then hands him a wrist protector. Taizen says that Yun never mentioned this. Broke tells him he'll be getting a few skills and stuff, but he can all check it out himself. Taizen says okay and walks in. Broke wishes him good luck. Broke thinks about how Taizen was smiling like he was excited for the labyrinth. He says he's met countless challengers who were called geniuses, but none of them were able to clear the labyrinth. But Taizen is different. It isn't talent or skill but more foundational. It's his will to survive. He says it'll be good if he lives. As Taizen walks in he gets a window explaining that the labyrinth was created by a great magician, and there are rumors if you clear it you will be granted a wish. It's a sealed world filled with things that are meant to oppress the challenger, but if they succeed, eternal glory awaits. Taizen sees a bright light, and has arrived on the first floor. Which is grody as hell. Taizen says it's time to start his second life. Floor 1 starts with a window saying to defeat the boss and pass. We get a flashback of Yun asking Taizen if he had a shopkeeper in easy mode. He says of course. She asks what they were like. Taizen says he was a simple merchant where he bought potions from. She says in solo mode they sell a lot more than potions, and she shows him a bracelet that she bought. She says there was a lot more than this, but she didn't have enough gold for them. She says if he could have bought the items then he'd be stronger than her. Taizen only paid half attention during that time, but it didn't matter back then. He opens a door to see an old man, smoking a pipe saying he didn't expect anyone so soon. A window appears, saying he's met the lost king. Taizen greets him politely, and the shop gramp says it looks like he's got some wits. He asks for his name, and Taizen introduces himself, then asks if he's the shopkeeper. Of course he is. Taizen looks around and says that there's nothing in the shop. And we see it's hella empty. Shop gramp smirks saying if he wanted to display all items the entirety of floor 1 wouldn't be enough. And he has no intention of showing him anyways. Taizen asks why he's here then. Shop Gramps gets angry, asking if he thinks he's here because he wants to be. He says he lost his kingdom because of this insanity and now he's suffering here for nothing. But he doesn't want to show his children to a brat who doesn't know anything. But if he can prove his worth that may change. He points to a corridor, saying if he goes in there and comes back out alive he'll show him his children. Taizen realizes the condition to purchase is just survival. He double checks it's all he has to do. Shop Gramps awkwardly stares at him, and says he's a weird one for sure. Taizen repeats his question, and Gramps says it's not that. Then Taizen says he'll be going then. Gramps wonders how he's so confident. And says it must be his Alzheimer's because he forgot he's him. He says it won't matter since he probably won't come back alive. Taizen starts to head down the corridor. He says so far the layout is identical to easy mode, and so far there aren't any dangers. Then he hears a rat screeching, and realizes that isn't true. He turns around to see a rat the size of a cat. It leaps at him. He says this was the boss in easy mode. And it bites him, dealing 10 damage. Taizen says the big rat's defense is low, but it's insanely quick so it took them a lot of time to defeat it. He attacks at the big rat, but it avoids it. He says it's as fast as he remembers. When they fought it in easy mode, the players worked together to chase it into a corner, then tired it out. But now he's alone, and his stats are lower than back then, so logically it's impossible to fight. Even Yun ran away from it at first. All of the players who were in solo mode, none of them fought with the big rat on the first floor. Now Tyson understands what Gramps meant by the coming back alive thing. Tyson starts to fight the big rat. While it bites him, he counterattacks but gets dodged. Tyson lifts his sword up, then stabs right toward the big rat, narrowly missing. The big rat backpedals to create distance. He says if he can't keep up with speed, then he needs to predict where it'll move. He starts to read the big rat's body language, and once he sees it prepare to move, he strikes at it. This intimidates the big rat, making it unable to think. Tyson straight up flames it for being dumb, and he says since it can't reach his ankles, it'll go for the next obvious spot. Which of course he leaves his wrist in a position for it to bite. The rat takes this chance to leap at him. Once it bites him, he lifts it up saying it's dead now. Then slams it against the floor, stabbing it in the chest. He repeatedly stabs it until it's dead, then we see him head back to Gramps. He's surprised, and Tyson says he's back while holding a bag of rat meat. Gramps drops his pipe seeing that Tyson survived. Tyson asks if he wanted him to die or something, and puts big rat materials on the counter. Tyson says since he's a shop, surely he buys stuff too, right? Gramps is still so surprised he killed one. He thinks about how he hunted the rat and butchered it extremely well, and how it was all done by someone who just entered the labyrinth. Gramps says he meets the requirements, so he'll open the shop. Tyson asks what he sells. Gramps says just say what he needs. Tyson asks if he has a tower shield, and Gramps asks why he wants a shield out of everything. He says so he can just crush the rats. Gramps says he likes the answer and places his hand on the wall. It turned golden and begins to open something. Then Gramps pulls out a tower shield asking if this one is good enough. Tyson says this quality is something from the 7th floor. Gramps tells him how much it is, and Tyson realizes he's short. He goes to head back into the dungeon to farm, but the Gramps just throws the shield at him saying he'll give it to him for free. And with how much gold he has now, there's a few things he can buy. He pulls out some potions and other items, then puts them on the counter for Tyson to choose from. But he says this is nothing like what Yun told him, so he asks why he's going so far for him. Gramps says he's just trying to be nice, and to think of it as an investment, and to stop being so noisy, pick some items to buy. Tyson inspects the potions, saying there are some for increasing speed, others for healing. But he doesn't need any of those right now. While he's heard how hard potions are to get in solo mode, they are mostly used in the higher floors. So these potions must be a trap of some sorts, or a test. And he should buy more items instead right now. He sees a bow saying he'll need to attack from afar, and it'll come in handy. He asks how much the big rat leather is, and Gramps tells him. Tyson says he'd like to sell it and buy the bow. Gramps smiles widely with satisfaction, and hands him the bow and arrows. He asks Tyson if he knows his health won't increase in the labyrinth. He says yes. Gramps then informs him of something called the Spring of Life here on the 1st floor that will heal him an infinite number of times, and that he'll mark the location on the map for him. He also tells him there will be a crazy old man there, but it shouldn't be a problem. He recalls how Yun told him the Gramps told her about it too, but he flamed her the entire time. So why is his attitude suddenly so different? He wonders if it's because of their methods. Yun couldn't kill the rat, so she ran away. But of course he didn't run, and killed it. He pins a rat with his shield, asking if this is the reason. Then we see him damage the rat over and over, killing it. He says he has too many questions, including the soul quality skill he has. We see it increases agility by once. Back when he killed the first big rat, he wondered why he was spammed with status windows. Aside from basic skills, he earned a lot of skills he earned on the 20th and 40th floor in easy mode. He says this is totally unfair, then notices that soul quality was maxed out. The skill says he will steal some of the opponent's power. He remembers now that he got it from killing the S ranks, but he didn't check it since he was too tired and didn't receive the skill due to not being in the labyrinth. But he kept it when regressing, and he decides not to worry since he'll just continue to grow stronger. He heads towards where Gramps marked on the map, and encounters another big rat. He says he guesses it's typical to run into them in the corridors, but we see there are multiple of them and now he is surrounded by raticates. He explains how even with their small brains they understand that they hold the advantage here. Then he starts to bang on the shield and it distracts one of them. So he uses the chance to run at it, knocking it backwards. He says he will not falter or hesitate. The other rat's attack is back, but weak due to passing some mental checks. He obtains a skill called Unshakable Mind. He backhands one of the rats into the wall. With the level ups and new skills he can easily react to a big rat's speed now. He insta-killed 2 of them, and levels up again. The first one he knocked back begins to be intimidated, so it cannot think. He begins to walk at it. And the big rat starts to go for his legs. Tyson thanks the rat for being so easy to predict, and stabs it with his shield. It jumps to a door open into a green area, and Tyson walks out of it. He looks around and discovers it's the Spring of Life, which is considered a resting area. He obtains a first discovery bonus, and gains additional stats. Tyson cups some water into his hand and drinks it, which recovers him into his best condition. He compares it to the reset you get from sleeping, but says his mental will definitely not be recovered. So he sleeps until the next day. He decides to check the community board now. He opens it to see people in solo mode asking if they should enter the labyrinth, and some others says not to since nobody is responding from the inside. And other people in normal mode asking for assistance to clear floor 1. Tyson says he thought this would be the case, since only solo mode has no other players they'll be trying to reach out. He smiles out of relief, after seeing Yun asking how she's meant to do this with crying emojis. He says for her to be acting like this at the start when she was considered the strongest, but he interrupts his own thought saying she might have been a scaredy cat until the very end, and just hit it to the rest. He says since it's only been a day since the labyrinth opened and most solo players will enter after a month has passed. He starts to comment on the video, saying he wants the next part. Many of the solo players then see a new message and it's Tyson explaining the clear method for the floor. He realizes it'll be hard for them to trust it, and out of everyone in solo mode only Yun survived last time. He decides it's time to grind. He pulls out his sword, and starts to cut some of the big rat meat up. It looks poisonous, and he wonders if it's even edible. But decides to eat the raw meat, and starts to chew it. The system runs a status check, and he's gained food poisoning. It will decrease your health for 2 days and if you don't cure it you will die. He drinks from the water, saying it's a nightmare for noobs, but instantly recovers to his best condition again. He keeps eating it, while explaining how hard it is to get food here, so he will be forced to eat raw meat in the future. He gets food poisoning again, and clears it with the water. He says he's starting to get full, and then a window appears saying he's suffered through many diseases so he's obtained a basic disease resistance skill. Now the food issue is solved with this. Now he'll be immune to food poisoning, and he decides it's time for the next skill. He gets into the water saying he hates doing this, then he shoves his head under the water and starts to drown himself. He says he needs to endure it. As he tries to beat David Blaine's record we see bubbles forming in the pond. Then he leaps out of the water. Due to drowning himself he's obtained 2 skills, one called Unbreathe and the other Line of Death. He's gasping for air out of the water, saying this better work. Unbreathe lets him hold his breath for twice as long, which will be useful in areas where there is poison in the air. But since you need to drown yourself just shy of death most people don't get it, but you get Line of Death too so it's not bad. Line of Death allows him to feel how close to death he is, and he wonders why his proficiency is so high. It's the same as it was in the future. He's surprised he can inherit something like this. He wonders if it's because it's a skill tied to the mind rather than the body, but then says his other skills didn't transfer. He says he has no idea, and he really doesn't plan to dwell on it too much. He pulls out his sword, saying he should just focus on earning more skills, and he's just getting started. It jumps to Hyuk, one of the solo mode players, asking Tyson if he's serious. I guess he posted how to get the skills, and Tyson says it's high risk high reward. Hyuk says he can't do this right now, and Tyson says it's his loss. Someone else tells Hyuk Tyson is just crazy. Back to Tyson, he is focusing while using Unbreathe with his sword. He explains that combination is important for skills. If certain skills and situations happen at the same time a new skill can be obtained. He performs various slashes with his sword, and explains that Unbreathe only applies while he's standing still, but he continues to hold his breath while slicing with his sword, then finally exhales and is gassed out. It says he's attacked many times while not breathing, so he's unearned unbreathing attack. And due to having obtained 10 skills he earns a title named Skill Player. Tyson is happy with his progress, and explains that since he can read the movements of the big rats, he can also do it with humans. Unbreathing attack will let him freely change his tempo, and he used the skill a lot when he cleared the labyrinth before. He opens his stats to see that his agility is 21, and he says that Yun only had 13 when she fully cleared the floor. Now he's so far ahead he can start working on his main skills. He explains that they are skills that will help him overcome large stat differences, such as his skills like addition and multiplication, or true damage. And his other cheat skills, they are super strong skills, so they have very specific ways to be obtained. For example, the complete surveillance skill was from evolving detection 3 times. He then says he must gain a main skill here on the first floor. A big rat appears. And it leaps towards his legs, he lets it bite him, and it continues to damage him. As his health drops, he starts to count how many hits he needs. He gets on the brink of death, and as soon as it says he's in danger of dying, he swings at it. His proficiency in line of death and calm mind both increase. The rat goes in for another attack, but he blocks it, which earns him the skill block. He says it's a good skill, but it is not the one he wants. He wants a skill called Endure, that would nullify death just once, then all damage after for a short duration. Nobody obtained the skill except him. He flashbacks to June asking how he got it, and Yun too. They ask why he's the only one with such skills. We get more lore about how skills can only be passed through others, or do something others could not. Or if you try to do something similar to the skill. He obtained Unbreathe by holding his breath, and swinging in that state gave him Unbreathing attack. So what should he do if he wants to learn Endure? The answer is simple, he just needs to continuously block attacks that would kill him. He does so, and earns the skill Endure. He smiles, then smacks the rat. He says it's a skill that can save your life, so there's no point in being too afraid not to learn it. June and Yun both blankly stared at him, then called him crazy after he told them how to get it. Taizen's mind is set on risking his life to further protect it. He drinks from the pond of life, and his leg heals up. He says he's glad he earned proficiency in the other skills, and wonders what to learn next. He starts to try and think, but has trouble since he had other 200 skills. An old man in armor enters the room, saying there's a visitor. The status window says he's a person searching for God. Taizen quickly pulls his shield out, and realizes it's an NPC. The old man asks if he's an adventurer. Taizen says that is correct. He recalls Yun mentioning something about this, but he doesn't know what she said next. The old man quickly launches a surprise attack at Taizen, and says try to block this. The old man is named Einzal, and he uses a non-lethal attack. As it gets right in front of his face, it activates his line of death. Taizen quickly raises his shield and the attack hits it. The impact creates a shockwave. Taizen says it's heavy as hell. Einzal is impressed. Taizen pushes the attack to the side and earns a skill for deflecting it. Then Einzal says what about this and punches at his face again. Taizen says there's nothing he can do, and eats it. It sends him flying into a wall. Einzal watches and says amazing. He thought it would do 100,000 damage, but it only did 30,000. Taizen is surprised he broke the labyrinth wall in one hit, and says all of the NPCs are monsters. Einzal says he was surprised, since Taizen let go of the shield as soon as he hit it to mitigate the damage he took. Taizen says he couldn't just stand there and take it. He agrees with him. Then stretches his hand out saying he wasn't planning to kill him. And even if it was a lethal attack he has Endure, so it's no problem. Taizen is surprised he saw it, and Einzal says he's been fighting while on the brink of death for a while, but his skills are impressive. He didn't expect him to deflect his attack with such low stats. Taizen says Yun never mentioned this. Einzal says he was afraid he would be a weakling, but he passed with full marks, then asks for his name. Taizen tells him, and then Einzal introduces himself, saying he is seeking his god. It jumps to Yun gasping over the water and complaining about the rats. We see Einzal walk into the room, then she turns around to see his fist right at her face. He seems disappointed and says she's a coward, then walks away. Then she never saw him again. Back to the present, we see him happily shaking Taizen's hand. Taizen asks why he attacks suddenly, and questions if it's to harass the weak. Einzal says of course not, he's a paladin, so why would he oppress the weak? He does it solely to evaluate those challenging the labyrinth. He checks whether they are worth his acknowledgement, or if they have what it takes to survive, and there's nothing more annoying than someone who doesn't understand themselves. But Taizen passed. Taizen asks what god he is looking for. He explains how there are many gods in the labyrinth. Many of them test and reward the challengers, but most people didn't care about them since they only existed in solo mode. Thanks to Yun telling him about how awful they were, he learned a lot of information about them. Story time ends. Einzal says the more people who know of his god the better, and the goddess's name is Levininov. He says they all worshipped her, and prayed from dawn till dusk. There wasn't a god more beloved to them, but his world was destroyed and he's the only one who remembers her. Taizen asks if he came here to find her, and he say exactly. Taizen knows who and where she is. The problem is that when Yun found her she was brutally murdered already. And it really messed with her mental. Taizen wonders if he should tell the truth or not, then Ainzal says he has a question. He asks if he's in a rush to escape the labyrinth. Taizen says no, since his goal isn't to clear it, rather just get overpowered. Ainzal claps, then suggests he learns some of Levinov's skills. Taizen says sure, and Ainzal is surprised he instantly agreed. Taizen says he has no reason, also if someone this strong is sharing he'll gladly accept. Taizen asks what he wants in return for learning, and Ainzal says just consider it an apology for attacking so suddenly. Even if it was a test, he was violent with someone he's never met before. Taizen asks why he just didn't attack in the first place. Ainzal says he's mistaken and the reason he's apologizing is because he's worthy, and if he wasn't he'd have spit on him and left. He keeps yapping about the goddess's skills. Taizen agrees and Ainzal is relieved, then says there's no need to delay. Time to begin. He tells Taizen to attack him with his shield. It jumps to more lore, and the skills that can be earned with a simple action are basic skills. Wielding a sword grants swordsmanship, if it's a spear you get spearmanship and so on. The moment you wield a weapon you receive the skill, and as the skill proficiency increased your knowledge with the weapon improves. So it's a skill that combines all of those basic skills. It isn't flashy, but is surely very useful. It's called the Eric Weapon Arts, and it's what he shall teach him. Taizen sighs at the longest explanation and says okay. Ainzal asks if he thinks it will be pointless. Taizen says just because they are all combined it doesn't change anything. While he starts to think about the issues with the system, Ainzal asks what his added attack is. Taizen tells him it's just 1, and Ainzal says then the damage amount should be around 4. Taizen says that's right, and Ainzal says that should be Shield's basic attack, so just hit him like he asked before, and uses a skill to guarantee he gets hit. Taizen says alright, then gently taps him on his head dealing 4 damage. Ainzal asks if he had to hit the head. Taizen apologizes. Ainzal says whatever, and this time to use his fists. Taizen says alright, and punches him in the chest dealing 2 damage. Ainzal asks if he understands what he wanted him to notice, and Taizen asks if it's about each weapon having a different damage amount. Ainzal says correct, and it's why adventurers only use a single weapon, and gives an example of if you equip a sword with 20 damage and a gauntlet with 50, depending on which you use that is how much damage you'll do, but you'll never get 70 damage. Taizen says that's obvious, and if it didn't work that way then all players would just be equipping themselves with a ton of weapons, which is why they pick one weapon and raise its proficiency alone. Ainzal says that it's uncomfortable to think they are forced to use a single weapon, and it's inefficient. Battling is something you do while risking your life, so you should be capable of using your entire body, attacking with your arms or tackling an enemy. Taizen says during that moment only the weakest damage value is applied. Ainzal says yes, but those who serve Levininov didn't like that. His body is a weapon, and his weapon is a part of his body. After a long period of time he was able to create the Eric Weapon Arts, which is a combination of all the basic skills and basing damage on the total attack of all equipped items. Taizen is shocked. Ainzal says think of what he mentioned earlier with the gauntlet and sword. With the Eric Arts every single hit would be 70 damage. Taizen then asks if it would apply to all hits, and not only a weapon. Ainzal says correct and his entire body would be a weapon. Even if he were to slap or tackle it would all deal the same damage. Taizen thinks that this is busted, even though he's already had hella cheat skills. He says it's an amazing skill. Ainzal says it may not be shocking since he already has Endure, but for normal adventurers it's something they'll never obtain, and asks if he wants to learn it. Taizen says of course. Ainzal laughs saying he likes that there's no hesitation. He puts his hand on his shoulder saying to relax his entire body. This is different from the other skills, since it's one he's created himself he can transfer it easily, and his proficiency is 100% so it'll be pain-free too. Status windows start appearing saying that the basic skills are being combined with the Eric Arts. Taizen is surprised he can earn such a good skill so easily, and after a few more seconds the skill has been finally transferred to him. It's considered an ultimate rank skill, and his proficiency is 1%. Ainzal says until he becomes proficient in it he recommends to train his body hard, and he'll give him this. It's a ring that gives him +1 attack. He apologizes for it being weak, but it's so he doesn't get drunk on power. Taizen says it's more than enough, since it has the same value as his rusty sword. Ainzal says now he's done everything he's wanted to, then asks if he would like to spar with him, so he can try out the Eric Arts before exploring more. Taizen says he has no reason to reject it, and pulls his shield out. Ainzal readies his fist, then quickly dashes in. Taizen also charges at him. He explains that in the labyrinth you're evaluated based on the actions you take. So no matter how worthless the room seems, if you search thoroughly your detection skill proficiency rises, and if you block attacks it's the same with your shield art skill. We see him blocking one of Einzal's attacks, and he attacks back saying a fight against the strong is also very worthwhile. It jumps to him panting after the sparring session, and he's laying on his back. He says they fought for 2 days straight, and he earned a new skill called Battle Persistence. This skill is what allowed him to fight the S ranks for so many days straight, and it's normally a skill you only get from fighting players, so he didn't think he'd get it. Einzal says he can't believe he's just an adventurer starting the first floor, and he's good at seeing through people, and he asks if it was worth it. Kaizen says it was. Einzal says to promise him 2 things. Since he's learned the Eric arts he can teach other people, but if they are pathetic then he must not teach them, and if he breaks this rule he will personally make sure to kill him. Kaizen says he understands. Einzal then says if he ever finds information on Levininov to tell him please. Kaizen says there's a low chance he'll meet him again in the labyrinth. Einzal starts to tear up saying he knows, but he's just hoping for a miracle. Kaizen says if he succeeded in finding her then either she wouldn't have died, or they'd have both died. So unless a big variable occurs before he finds her, she will definitely be killed by someone. He wonders if he should tell him or not. He then asks if he wants to know her location. He says of course he does. Kaizen then tells him that he actually knows where she is, and his eyes immediately change compared to how they were a moment ago, like a crack fiend. Einzal asks him what he means, and Kaizen says it's exactly as it sounds. Einzal tells him he's taking this joke too far. He's roamed the entire labyrinth and wasn't able to find even a hint of her, so how would someone who just entered know where she is? Kaizen says he's already thought about how to answer this, and says his world has an item related to the labyrinth. Einzal says that's some cap, but Kaizen says it's a map connected to a special existence rather than the labyrinth itself. Einzal is surprised, and asks about an item called the God Calling Horn. Kaizen says that's the one. It's an item that tells you the location of a god, and his family has information on it so he memorized the locations of all the gods written there. He only knows of it since Yun showed him it before. It was an item she got on the 89th floor. He tells him exactly where Levininov is at, and Einzal says that makes so much sense, as he wasn't able to check there yet. Kaizen says now he's repaid him. Einzal says it's more than enough and he's never been this thankful to someone else in his life, and that he's truly indebted to him. Kaizen says he's hurting his shoulder, and Einzal quickly apologizes saying he lost control for a second. Kaizen asks him if he's going right away. Einzal says that it'd be difficult and he'll need to prepare thoroughly, and it's hard to convey with words how grateful he truly is. But he wants to repay him. He hands him a ring that gives him 20 health saying it'll be good for him to take. Kaizen is surprised since he says its quality would have come from the 30th floor in easy mode. Einzal says normally he'd not do this, but he truly feels the worth inside of Kaizen, and knows he isn't lazy. Kaizen smiles saying he doesn't have the time to laze around, then Einzal says it's time for him to be going now. And that he hopes they'll see each other again. Einzal starts to go crazy saying Goddess I'm coming. He laughs while skipping out of the room. Kaizen wonders if he'll be able to find her, and if he does if she'll be alive. Or if she will have already been killed by the time he reaches her. He says regardless it'll be a long time before he meets him again. It jumps to later and he's been farming for a bit so now he can easily kill the big rats. His soul quality is also too high now to be leveled from the rats. Kaizen says it's unfortunate, but he expected as much. He says he's grown as much as he can hear on the first floor, so he should start heading up. But he has somewhere to check out first. He explains that there are secret rooms and each floor has one, and those who find them are given rewards. You guys can already imagine what's in them. Only one person can enter the room so the competition was nuts in easy mode, but now he's in solo mode so he can obtain all of them. He opens a hidden door asking if the layout will be the same, and he finds an empty room. He smiles saying it is the same. He explains that there's one entrance and it is an empty room, and many people ignored the room. But there is a secret room inside of it. He starts to inspect the bricks, and taps on the walls to find the hidden room. He just starts pulling each brick out one at a time, but finds himself enjoying it a lot. He says this is better than just sitting in a room surviving. His detection proficiency increases as he pulls a brick out. And it opens a hidden wall saying he's the first to discover a secret room, so he obtains the title of adventurer and gets a permanent stat increase. He sees a chest at the end of the room, and says while it looks like he can just run to it there's no way that's the case. He heads outside and finds a rat, stomping on it. He picks it up, then heads back inside throwing it into the secret room. It lands on part of the floor that sinks in. Then it gets shot by an arrow. Kaizen says as expected, and it doesn't look like a difficult trap either. He starts to walk where he the rat, then catches the arrow. He says he can do this if he concentrates. He says he was quite low on arrows, so this is the perfect chance to restock on them. And he activates the trap again. He quickly grabs 2 arrows from the air, and as another flies at him he dodges it, saying it's getting more difficult, but buying arrows from the shop would be a waste when he can just get them for free here. We see some of them have poison and paralysis on them. But it doesn't matter to him. He wonders if he should go again from the first trap, and more arrows fly out. He says it's an exploit, but it works for him. After 100 arrows he says it should be enough, and he starts to walk toward the chest. He leaps forward, and crouches, explaining that if he wants to just get to the end he can block the arrows with his shield and run. But this is the labyrinth, so he needs to show a perfect process. He starts to deflect some of the arrows, and catching the rest, then uses the ones he caught to break the next one. He steps on another tile, which fires 9 arrows at him. He activates his unbreathing attack, and another skill called Clear View, to determine all the arrows' trajectories. He says it'll be difficult to dodge them all, but he dodges the first one, then snaps the other arrows out of the air. As one flies at his chest he activates Deflect, causing one of them to bounce around him. As the rest fly close, he grabs one and uses it to knock the rest of them down. Then steps on the final trap. He says there should be 10 arrows, but he quickly realizes he was wrong as there are 15. He backpedals, saying he won't be able to block them all like this, but as there are more, a few will have the same trajectory. So he tanks the remaining arrows, which cause him to start bleeding. He says it hurts, and he obtains a skill called Reduce Pain. He says if he didn't experience it in the past he'd have fallen unconscious. He walks over to a lever in the room, pulling it so the traps are all disabled now. So it's time for the reward. He opens the chest. He sees it's a staff, and is surprised he already found one. He explains that they usually don't come out until stage 10 of hard mode. He wonders if it's fake, but quickly sees that it's real. He says the Staff of Fire is more powerful than the other types, and he's surprised at how good the items are in solo mode. Yun was too scared to get to the secret room, so he has no reference of the items. When he walks out he gets jump-ed by a small rat, but dodges, saying even though he cannot use one of his arms. Due to the stat difference it's no problem, and due to him moving while being in a debilitated state he earns a skill called Unbreaking Will. He quickly stomps the big rat out, killing it. Then heads back to the Spring of Life and drinks it to heal his arm up, and decides to look at the skills he's earned so far today. They were mentioned previously, but he says they'll be useful in the future. Unbreaking Will allows him to temporarily ignore injuries. He holds up the staff, saying this is the biggest gain he got. He says again it's time to head down to the next floor. He explains how the stairs that lead down are always protected by a boss, so the player just needs to kill the boss to move down. He walks up to a big red door, saying it'd be nice if the boss was an easy one, but since it's solo mode he already knows it isn't. He opens the door to see a battle scar that is actually quite large. The giant rat screeches at him, and he says this was the boss of easy mode's 10th floor, and he recalls how hard the fight was previously. The boss starts to run at him, and he says he's ready. More lore time. The boss isn't something that players can beat without a lot of effort, so Yun Cheese did she use the fact that the boss cannot leave its room, like a Dark Souls boss, and filled the room with oil then lit it on fire, which eventually killed the rat from smoke. He says since she was the only one to survive solo mode it's surely a good answer. But he knows that he can do better. He pulls out the Staff of Fire and as the rat gets right into his face he activates Fireball, which deals 14 damage to the boss, and it failed the fire resist check so is on fire. He says this is good, since it will deal 1 damage every 10 seconds, but it isn't enough. He draws his bow, and shoots a poison arrow at the rat dealing 7 damage, but it resists the poison. He says he'll just keep trying until it works, then shoots paralysis arrows at it, until one of them actually stun it. He says the arrows are goated, but it's time to start the grind. He walks up and pulls more arrows out. He continues to damage it, and says his plan is simple, paralyze the boss then spam it full of poison arrows. The boss looks like it's turned into a porcupine. So he pulls out the shield, and starts to smack it, saying this fight is just a stomp. After a bit its eyes begin to glow, and he says there's a limit to this method. He explains how when the boss reaches below 20% health it turns into a berserk state, so the paralysis arrows will no longer be able to stun the boss, and that's how they lost a lot of people in easy mode. He says it's time for the second phase. The boss leaps at him and attacks, but he blocks it. He says it might be too much with his current stats, as his strength is too low. So he'll use his dexterity to slowly whittle its health down. He smashes its foot, causing its nails to dig into the ground, and he uses the chance to charge it and hit it. The boss roars, then counterattacks, but Taizen smacks it back, trading blow for blow. He's starting to run out of breath, and decides it's time. He equips his sword, and uses unbreathing attack. Then starts to slash at the rat, dealing 15 damage to it with 2 attacks, but the boss claps back, dealing 24 to him. He says he can take a few more hits, especially if he uses endure and deflect, he can maybe tank 8 of them. He attacks the boss again, and decides he needs to quickly finish this fight, so rushes straight in. He parries the boss's hit, so his next attack will deal extra damage. He stabs the boss straight in the chest, causing it to spill a ton of blood. The boss roars with its final breath, then falls onto the floor, and he gets a window saying he's cleared the first floor. He says it was easier than he thought, and now it's time for the rewards to begin pouring in. He gets spammed with notifications about stat increases and so on. He levels up so he can recover to his peak condition. He gets a stat increase potion as well, but due to clearing the hidden condition he gets 2 additional ones. He says these are hard to get even after the 50th floor. He quickly chugs them over the boss's corpse. He decides to use the stats on strength since it's his lowest stat, and now he's pretty happy with his current stats. He sighs, saying it's crazy high they are for being on the first floor, and he got another skill called counter, which is what happened when he deflected the boss. He lays down on the boss, saying he's gotten everything he needed. And he wonders how his community post is doing, and since he has no expectations he decides to go check it out, and is surprised. On the community board we see the Walmart version of All Might, and everyone is talking. Yun is telling them all to get to the Spring of Life to be safe. Yoke also says that it's good everyone is alive. Taizen is surprised people made it to the Spring of Life, since in his previous life they just died off rip. And it was nothing but final words being said on the board. Eventually it fell silent with only Yun remaining. Due to plot convenience she's asking about Taizen on the board. Then it jumps to him ready to keep going down, and we see he's bought some gloves. Shop Gramps picked up on him learning the Eric arts. And we learn Taizen is looking for the blacksmith. His name is Harpin and Yun told him about him. Taizen heads down a giant spiral staircase, and then sees a bright light, to reveal that he's finally made it onto the second floor. The reward for this floor is a mana increase potion, which he says is really rare. But he gets hard spammed with messages, and he finally replies. The players go crazy since he's actually replied, and he wonders who to reply to first. We see Yoke whispers Taizen, and he asks him what he needs. Yoke says he just wanted to check on how Taizen is doing. Taizen says he should worry about himself first, then he asks if he just read one thing and decided to run in. Yoke says they had no choice, they needed to try something. They cannot get food outside, and since nobody inside was replying he decided to just enter, and when he finally made it inside he saw that the method to clearing the floor was there. Yun was the first, and she encouraged the others to enter. We learn that only 2 people have succeeded in killing a big rat so far, both Yun and Yoke. Taizen is surprised since in his previous life he didn't hear about Yoke, so he'd probably be dead without his post. He tells him that Einzal will be coming to see him soon, and respond properly then he'll receive something good, and to tell Yun too. Yoke asks if he's okay, since he's helping his competition. He keeps yapping about how he'll catch up at this rate. But gets flicked in the head, and Taizen says they aren't competitors, but rather all comrades with the same goal. And not to just go die randomly, be careful since even if he knows how to clear a floor, executing it is a different task, and not to worry about catching up since he has plot armor. Yoke says my bad, and as Taizen goes to leave he says it's about time. He asks how the community is, and Yoke says it's fine minus there being a few people from other difficulties that wanted to fight. Taizen says alright, and leaves. On the second floor he explains how the first was considered the tutorial, and it'll begin from here on out. We see some goblins inside of a broken down building, and Taizen kicks the door open. They see him and he draws his bow saying come get it if the price is right. Taizen explains while he fights the goblins, that while they are weak, he shoots his arrows and hits one, while paralyzing the other. But one runs close with a shield, Taizen equips his and blocks the attack. He says nice try, then tells him to try blocking this, then smacks him into the floor with his shield. We see it drooling on the floor, and he tells it goodbye. It screams to alert the other goblins. Taizen says there's no use then stabs it. The reinforcements leap at him, and he notices one of them has a long sword equipped. He equips his fire staff, then launches a fireball at them. Exploding where they were, we see he's picked up the sword. And he's happy, saying it'll be better to go along with his tower shield. He enters an ominous room, and sees something called the altar of Regresses. He obtains some stats for the first discovery. He gives us a little lore saying the gods have varied personalities, some are nice, some aren't, and most gods treat players as toys. He recognizes Regresses as a god of death and conflict. He recalls Yun telling him how he ran away from it instantly. A red mist begins to swirl around him, and he's given a quest from Regresses saying if he accepts he'll face a test, and will be rewarded based on performance. Kaizen says he's no coward, and he'll gladly accept it. The red mist begins to take shape in front of him. We see some metal arms and legs forming. It continues to take shape until a knight appears. It's the servant of Regresses. It's a fake version. Kaizen realizes that due to its armor this'll be hard, since the enemy will not have any openings. The knight charges forward with a vertical slash, but Kaizen blocks it. He still takes 25 damage even while blocking, and realizes there's no point in using the shield. He equips 2 swords, saying it's been a while since he's dual wielded. He decides to take the initiative, and attacks the knight. The knight blocks his attack, but Kaizen quickly follows it up, but the knight is unfazed. Kaizen says it's so much stronger than him so he shouldn't face it head on any longer. He creates distance, the knight begins to chase him. When it gets close, he turns to face it saying his dexterity is higher. And he begins to successfully land attacks. His sword gets stuck in the knight's side. He lets go of it and begins to punch it repeatedly in the side. Due to the Eric weapon arts, each blow he lands will be as effective as the sword was. He creates distance again saying this is easier than he thought. But says it's because it's only the second floor, it's been balanced, and it's definitely not the fight Regresses wants. On cue, Regresses begins to manifest its authority and the fake knight begins to regain its intelligence and techniques. Kaizen sweats as the look in the eyes of the knight have changed entirely, and it's now real. The knight pulls the sword out of his side, then throws it at Kaizen. He comments on how the atmosphere around the knight is different now. He picks the sword up saying the methods he used before won't work anymore. It quickly attacks him, but he manages to block it with both swords. The knight imbues aura into his sword, with aura which damages Kaizen even though he's blocking it. He wonders what the hell is going on, then the knight sends him flying. He hits a wall losing 20 health. He knows from that attack that this knight has received proper training. He says it's his first time facing something like this. Even with his weapons in hand he can't control them the way he wants. He says that he wants to learn it, and that it might be a skill of the knight. He begins to get that crazed look when he gets a new skill, and decides he really wants it. He determines himself to learn it, and says he admits the knight is better with the sword, but that he's a player, so he can use more than the sword. He pulls out the fire staff, and launches a fireball at the knight. The knight cuts it in half, then notices that Kaizen is gone. He quickly appears behind the knight and slashes its back. The knight swings for a counter-attack, but Kaizen activated deflect. He still takes 15 damage. But it gives him a window to use his unbreathing attack for rapid follow-up. He manages to push the knight back and lands 3 hits in the process. It grants him the ability of consecutive attacks, and he pulls out the fire staff. He launches a fireball, and it hits the knight in the face. It then begins to burn the knight. Kaizen wonders if he's going to die here, since he only has 5 mana and 70 health left. He'll be at a disadvantage if it drags out longer, so he decides to end it. He leaps at the knight and with both swords in his hand he prepares for an attack. The knight stabs out and it hits Kaizen, dealing 80 damage. But due to endure he nullifies the attack, then uses both swords and stabs the knight with them. They both land in its throat. Then he screams as he uses the 2 swords to cut the knight's head off. Kaizen is gassed out. Then we hear the knight saying that was an excellent fight, and a window appears saying he was successful. Regresses was very satisfied. Kaizen says satisfied or not, how the hell are you just going to change the quest? That's just cheating. He is then granted enough experience to level up, and due to defeating a strong enemy his soul quality increases. He wonders how much he grew, and we learn he got 17 stats in total, 30 health and 5 mana from that. He says it's a shame it didn't drop loot. Regresses wants to grant him an aware befitting of the difficulty, then grants him a ceremonial sword. It is 5 attack and heals him for 5 health upon each kill. He asks if Regresses can even offer him this, since it's not something remotely close to his floor. Regresses says it's only fair. Kaizen then receives another skill called Proof of Combat from Regresses. It's a skill that makes him stronger when he's victorious in battle. The ground begins to shake. Kaizen wonders what the hell is coming next, then sees that Regresses has offered him an apostle contract. He wonders what it is, and looks around saying there's no explanation. He sits down to think about it. He realizes that the gods need to take a penalty when they want to influence a player. Regresses wants to make him an apostle even with all of the penalty. He says even if it seems like goodwill, it's still a god. It increased the difficulty just because it was losing, so would accepting the offer even be worth it, or would he end up a puppet for the rest of his life? He promptly clicks decline on the proposal. He's glad Regresses didn't get angry when he declined it, then gives him another quest saying it wants him to clear the second and third floor then return back to the altar. Taizen says nah, and he won't accept since it fooled him last time. Regresses offers it again, and says the rewards will be very generous. Taizen sighs, saying whatever and accepts it. We see Regresses is happy by his decision. Taizen heads back up to Shop Gramps, who is surprised he's back already. Taizen says he's got some stuff to buy, and Shop Gramps is surprised why he's getting potions. Taizen says he didn't plan to get them until later, but if a test like before occurs he'll need them. Shop Gramps then notices his sword, and calls Regresses a pervert. He says that he must have liked him a lot. Taizen asks if he knows him. He says that many people died because of him being a mad god, and he just does whatever he wants. Taizen realizes he's a crazy god, then asks what an apostle is. Shop Gramps laughs, asking if he's been offered the position. Taizen says yes, but he refused. Shop Gramps says that's good, and he can't actually tell him, since it'd be a breach of his contract to run the shop. Taizen asks about it, but he shoos him away, saying to go if he bought what he needed. Taizen leaves, and says it should be time for the meet soon. He goes to the community board and we see Yun and Yoke are there. He asks if they met Einzal. They both say he was different from what they said, and he treated them harshly, then just walked away from them. Taizen asks if he didn't block his attack, and Yoke asks how he was meant to do that. Yun says she couldn't either. Taizen asks what they did. We learn Yoke grabbed onto his leg, and wouldn't let him go, but he told him to piss off as he's worthless. Taizen then asks where they are now, and they both say they are hunting big rats as they wanted to level. They tell him more people are hunting the rats now, and Taizen decided to tell them about the second floor later. He tells them more about the first floor and how the boss is a giant rat with over 200 health. They asks how he killed something like that. He says they'll have to figure out on their own, and they'll surely cook something up. They say okay, and they'll warn the other players. Then he dips saying he said everything he wanted to. And he wants to start Regresses' test. Back on the second floor we see him banging his sword to his shield to draw the goblins out. And they begin to appear all over from random places, and screech while running at him. He decides to test his skills out, and with proof of courage activated he instantly attacks 3 of the goblins with one clean motion dot and lands on top of one, stabbing it in the chest. He says this is crazy good, as it's healing him too. There's no limits or restrictions so he might be able to fight forever if he can maintain it. He says it might become his main skill depending on the situation. We hear the sound of him fighting them, then we see one getting thrown into a wall. He looks over at it while dragging one of their bodies. And he spots a door that he's never seen before. He enters and finds something called the Warrior's Grave. He gets a first discovery bonus, that gives him 1 int and 2 mana. He touches it, and a weird energy begins to pour from it and forms into something. We see it's a little blob ghost, and he says hello, then immediately says goodbye and hides. Taizen is lost as hell, then peeks over the back of the grave and the ghost does it again. He goes back to hide. Taizen starts to get a bit annoyed, and the ghost comes out asking what he's doing, then gets grabbed. Taizen says to stop messing around and give him a quest. The ghost flies away asking if he knows who he is. Taizen says some dead warrior. Who else would he be? The ghost says it must be convenient when the system tells you everything. Taizen asks if there wasn't a system in his time. The ghost says there was, then laughs. Taizen is annoyed. He wonders what's with him since his aura is so different from the other people he's met so far. Taizen asks if he's a quest, or an object. The ghost says treating someone like an object is bad-mannered, then sighs and says okay. He's a ghost that's been stuck here to give quests. But he won't give it to a weakling. Taizen asks why he's on the second floor then. The ghost says he has no idea, and they should have put him on the lower floors. He tells Taizen to come back after he's cleared the 30th floor. Taizen clicks his tongue, saying it's a useless NPC not worth appeasing as he's leaving. The ghost notices the ceremonial sword then asks why he has Regresses' sword. He says he cleared the test. The ghost is surprised, then says he'll give him a quest after all. The ghost tells him to wait and he'll explain the quest, but Taizen says he doesn't want it. The ghost gives him some self-lore, saying he was an excellent warrior and was deemed as the one who'd clear the labyrinth. While attempting to conquer the deeper floors, he met a strong enemy, so he went back to the 10th floor to rest. And while his health was low, the monsters couldn't pierce his defenses, but the boss had a weapon with a set attack that was used to kill him in his sleep. He's pissed that he died to such a weak mob. And says his quest is simple: just kill the 10th floor boss, and he'll give him a reward if he does that. The reward is dependent on his mood, which means if he's pissed off he might not get anything. He decides to accept it, then tells him goodbye. As he walks away, the ghost quickly follows him, and Tyson is surprised the ghost is going with him. The ghost is really loud and Tyson finds him a bit obnoxious. The ghost keeps repeating how rare set attack weapons are and asks how he thinks the boss got it. Tyson really just doesn't want to hear anymore. Tyson decides to ask questions rather than just listening, and asks what he did before the labyrinth. The ghost asks why he wants to know, and Tyson keeps walking, saying he doesn't need to tell him. The ghost says he'll tell him if he wants to know, and he was from the great royal family of the Carvid Empire. He was the eldest son who would inherit it all. He was excellent in both swordsmanship and intelligence, and he was quite a womanizer. Tyson says he talks like a street thug. The ghost continues, saying his world ended, and he came here to save everyone. Tyson then mockingly says that he died in his sleep, and the ghost is angry, saying he'll only be satisfied when he kills the boss who killed him. Tyson ignores him, then opens a door to find some goblins having a little party. He quickly shoots arrows towards them. He paralyzes a few of them, then attacks the one who didn't get hit. He smacks it on the head, the rest begin to get unparalyzed, but he shoots another arrow at them again. Then smacks them again. The ghost asks if he's trying to get a skill. Tyson says yeah. The ghost tells him that sadly this will be fruitless and he won't get a skill. Tyson says he will. The ghost then tells him that he went to the 85th floor, so he knows his shit. Tyson offers him a bet, saying if he can't get a skill he'll be his puppet, and he'll do anything he wants. But if he wins then he'll answer all of his questions without lying. The ghost says he has guts, but agrees to it, and we finally learn his name is Arclight. Arc for short. Tyson tells him not to go back on his word. Arc starts to imagine making Tyson crawl around for some reason, and thinks about everything he'll make him do. Tyson asks if he knows of the skill battle. Arc says yes, it's a basic skill. When both parties agree to a fight nobody can interfere. Tyson says he can get something similar to that here, but Arc says nah. Plot armor activates and Tyson obtains the skill called Forced Battle, which makes him fight only one enemy at a time. Arc is like oh. Tyson is happy though since he got another main skill. Arc says this makes no sense, asking how he got this skill by doing something so useless. Tyson says this might be exactly why not many people have it. Arc wonders what he's been doing to obtain skills. Tyson smiles, asking if he remembers the wage. Arc is not happy. He tells Tyson skills aren't everything, so don't be cocky. Tyson sighs, asking why he's yapping. He just needs him to answer some questions. Arc angry. Arc then says that Forced Battle is a good skill, but what about the leap skill? Tyson asks why he's not mentioning Large Leap instead. Arc asks what that is, and Tyson says looks like he never learned it. Arc sighs, saying that he admits that he's knowledgeable, and asks what he's doing. We see Tyson knocking on the bricks to find a secret room, and he spots a brick shining. He pushes it out of the way, and Arc is surprised, since if Tyson found this then it means his proficiency in detection is high. We see traps up on the ceiling. Arc tries to suggest that he just turn and come back another time. But Tyson looks at it. He says looks like the first traps are arrows, the second trap is a pitfall, and finally the last one is a trap with moving walls. He says it's the same as in easy mode. He makes a leap towards the first trap, and uses his ceremonial sword to block some of the arrows. Then he leaps off the wall beside the pitfall, and runs straight towards the third trap. As he gets closer to the treasure, the walls begin to close in on him. He empowers his fist, then punches straight through one of the walls. Arc is surprised by this. And Tyson says that the walls were made by goblins, so they are quite flimsy. He disables the traps, and wonders what he'll find in the chest. He pulls out a ring that gives 5 mana, and he says this is good timing. Arc asks him what the hell he is. Tyson asks if he'd understand if he told him second time. Arc is lost, and Tyson says not to worry about it, and it only proves that to get the Bezoar he needs to get past the 85th floor. We learn it's only been 10 days since he's entered the labyrinth, and the community board are still panicking about the rats. Tyson says it's about time, then he types in the chat. Yoke asks why he didn't open a private room like usual. Tyson says he thought he'd explain some things. Yoke informs him that half of the people who made it to the spring were able to hunt a big rat, and that he and Yun haven't fought the boss quite yet. Yun says she's currently trying to find a way to cheese it. Taisen lets them talk for a bit, then says he's here to explain skills to them, and that right now is the best time to explain, and he waited since he wanted people to get their footing first. Yun says even if they knew about them early they'd not know what to do with the info. They all start to thank Taisen, saying they know this'll be very good info, and he tells them to wait until they've heard it all, before thinking it's a good thing. He tells them the first skill they should learn is reduce pain, and to stab a sword through their arm. It has to properly hit the bone to count. They are a bit hesitant and ask if that's really what they need to do. He tells them the spring of life is right there, so what's the issue? They are speechless. He tells them if they manage to fight a rat with a sword injury they'll get a skill called Unbreakable Will. They wonder if he's telling them to commit the unalive, and then he tells them all about Unbreathe, while some of them know from when he mentioned before. Others weren't there, same with Endure, which is that they need to block 30 hits at 1 health. They start to feel like no matter how much they need skills, this seems really excessive. Taisen tells them he's not forcing them, and that the choice is theirs. He says it's not a surprise that they don't want to, since they just came from a peaceful world, and they probably never had to risk their lives for anything. Yun asks if there's really no other methods, and he tells her there isn't. It looks like her and Yoke are gonna give up, but they quickly say they guess they need to be insane for a bit. The rest ask if they'll really try it, saying it could just be a lie. They ask why Taisen would lie even though he's helped them all so much thus far. Yoke says he'll go for Unbreathe first, and Taisen says that as long as he pays attention to the system window he'll be okay. He leaves telling them to work hard. Ark says he's doing something useless by trying to give them advice like this, as they are fated to die here. Taisen says he'll give it a try anyway as it could change things. Ark says whatever, and to just enter the boss room already, and asks if he'll be asking him about the boss. Taisen says no, and he has other things to ask instead. He opens the door saying it's time to start. We see a goblin with a staff, and it has a purple aura around it. It speaks enchantment table and a melee goblin leaps at him. He blocks the attack, and smacks it. Ark tries to tell him to stop tunneling, and wonders if it's already too late. The staff goblin keeps channeling for his attack. Ark tries to tell him that he needs to kill the staff guy first. Taisen tells him he's got this, and he's doing the right method here. The attack flies straight at Taisen, and we see him close his eyes, and when he opens them he sees some nightmare fuel. We hear the voices of the damned, asking why he chose easy mode. He flinches a bit, and they begin to grab his feet. He looks over to see Yun asking why he didn't come for her. She begins to cry, asking why he didn't save her. The pile of bodies turn into a wave and crash down on Taisen. And he begins to drown in it, but he locks in saying this won't work on him. Ark watches him from outside the metal barrier, and says this is why he should have listened to him. The staff goblin launches some fireballs at Taisen, but he opens his eyes in the real world and uses his sword to block the attack. Ark is surprised he endured it. Even the goblin wonders how he got out of the mental attack. It prepares another one, but he brushes it off, saying he told him it was useless, since he's never failed a check that's for mental attacks. The goblin drops to the floor, but he grabs it by the throat and lifts it into the air. He tells it goodbye and stabs it in the chest. Ark wonders how he did that, since even his willpower couldn't have done that. And that he's clearly going to be too difficult to actually control. He gets his mana potion for clearing the floor, and even got a lock-picking set that'll let him disarm traps. Ark says he's gotten everything he could have from here, and Taisen asks if that's an issue. They banter for a bit, and he heads to the 3rd floor. The clear reward is a vitality increase potion. But he of course heads back up to the shop, and Ark flies over to him, surprised he's still alive. He tells Taisen that Ark is a loser and not to let him influence him. Ark claps back, saying that's bold from an old man who only knows how to pray. They keep arguing and Taisen tries to tell them to stop. They have absolutely no interest, so he sighs, then starts dumping his inventory, saying to stop yapping and deal with everything here that he'll be selling. Shop Gramps is surprised, asking how many mobs he killed. It jumps to after and we see that he's got some new gloves, and a small shield. He also decided to buy a bunch of jewelry. Now our boy is iced out. He says 2 hits will be enough for goblins now. Both Ark and Shop Gramps say the Eric arts are overpowered. They keep arguing and Taisen says he'll be leaving now. After they leave he asks Ark why their relationship is so bad. Ark asks what's there to even like about the old man. He warns him that he could turn against him at any moment, and he's an old man who gave in to them, of course without saying who in typical Manhwa fashion. Taisen says he'll keep that in mind, and he sees the figure of a monster approaching him. "Never mind, it's just some goblins being goofballs." He's a little speechless, then instantly starts mogging them. He kicks one while the other tries to run, but he squishes him like a bug. He continues his rampage, and Ark says usually each pack is tough, and even he almost died here. But he cleared each room in just a few minutes. Tyson says it's clearly easier than the second floor. He goes to the next room, and Ark asks why he's still clearing the floor, saying they won't give him much. So why not run it down mid and end? Tyson says he has a quest. Ark asks about it, and he tells him it's from Regresses. He says he didn't get a quest like that from him, and he passed his trial too. Tyson says regarding that, how much does he know of apostle contracts? Ark says it's no fair he got one and pouts because he didn't even receive one from Regresses. He sits on his head like a bird, asking where he should begin. Tyson is surprised he's not making a fuss, and Ark says he's already dead, there's no restriction on the information he can share. He explains how each god has their own territory, and sometimes gods like Regresses have multiple aspects, his being conflict and death, while others only have one, like victory or defeat. Tyson asks what it means to be a god in here, as it's different from where he's from. Ark says they aided in the construction of this place, and he mentions how the system told them about there being a rumor of a wish. It was too difficult for the great mage to make it himself, so he sought transcendence like Saw Jun and told them all of his plan, to make it go down to the abyss. And how he wanted a lot of warriors to charge into it to try and race to clear it, and their deaths could be entertainment too. Tyson says it seems like the gods really enjoy that. Ark says it's more than that. They all went pog crazy supporting the great mage. And after the gods spent time helping make it, the labyrinth was finally created. They all took their places in the labyrinth all the way to the deepest floor. From there they watch those who enter and give them trials to determine their values. To those they really like they offer apostle contracts. Tyson asks if it's a good or bad thing. Ark says if you become an apostle you gain a lot of abilities, depending on how much you're favored, and they may even help you. He asks about the downsides, and Ark says your soul belongs to the transcendent and some of the other gods may dislike you. Since there are so many gods and they all want different things, and Regresses in particular has a ton of enemies, since they think he's a disgrace. So if he keeps going down they'll cause annoying things to happen. And he'll need to follow his god's orders, even if it's something unfair he cannot reject it. Tyson says it'll be best to give up on the option of being an apostle, and on the topic of granting a wish. He doesn't recall Yun ever mentioning a wish even though she conquered it all. He wonders if maybe that's what the Bezor was, but says that she'd definitely wish for something else. He starts to get a headache saying things aren't adding up. If he pairs it with Ark's story, why is Earth an exception? He decides he'll just focus on clearing the floor for now. It jumps to him disarming a trap successfully, and he obtains a skill for it, but the window tells him it'd be better if he tried to ignore the trap than disarm it. Tyson says he thought it'd take 100 traps to earn it, but is happy it didn't. He tries to disarm another trap, but fails. He begins to try again and Ark asks why he's wasting so much time on a useless skill. He says he can just pass through the traps physically like he did before. Tyson says since he's trying to clear a place he doesn't know about, having as many trump cards as he can is for the best. He'll take everything he can. We see his proficiency go up. Ark realizes he's right, and that he failed his own rule. It jumps a bit later, and we learn he's increased it another 7%, and that from the secret room he got a ring of +3 strength. He goes back to a room full of goblin bodies, and says it's time to go to the boss now. He approaches the boss room, and Ark says he can surely guess about what'll appear right. He says he knows, and we see some goblin hieroglyphs. Tyson says even without those it's obvious what will appear, and then we see the boss makes his appearance. It's a goblin chieftain. Ark says it's pissed that he killed all the goblins. Tyson rushes at it and the boss casts a magic spell at him. He avoids it, and keeps running at the boss, and he says it's not the only one with a staff. We see him activate a mental spell on the boss, and it begins to shake his head from the confusion spell. Tyson attacks its leg, dealing 21 damage. And we see that the boss didn't get confused by the spell, and swings at Tyson. He watches as it gets close, and says it's quite slow, then uses one finger and pushes the attack out of the way, then leaps into the air above the boss and starts to toy with it while smiling. Ark says he knew the boss wouldn't be a match for him, and how it's no fun since it's meant to be tough. Tyson pushes the boss to the ground, which kills it, so now he's cleared the 3rd floor. A bunch of windows appear, and he consumed the vitality potion. While looking at the staff the boss was holding, we see it has magic +3 on it and he asks what it does since he's never seen it before. Ark says his luck is nuts, Taizen asks what it is and he says it'll strengthen the power of magic he's learned. Taizen is surprised he can learn magic, and Ark says it's out of character he's surprised about this, since he's already met monsters that use magic. Taizen says he thought it was due to the staff they were wielding, since even Yun didn't use magic. He asks how to learn it and Ark says he either needs to discover a concept on his own, or learn it from someone else. Taizen realizes the first is nearly impossible, but the second should be doable. He wonders about what NPC would teach him. And if the NPC was somewhere Yun didn't know about, it explains why nobody else knew, since NPCs are only in solo mode. He then wonders if it means he can't use magic. Ark asks if he'll go to the 4th floor now. He tells him no, and he needs to go back to Lake Aradas. He looks at the window and sees there's no secret clear reward, and he realizes he missed something. Ark also wonders what he didn't get it, and suggests maybe there's a 2ND secret room. Taizen asks if he knows anything, and he says no. He didn't even find the secret room on this floor. Taizen then notices all of the hieroglyphs are looking at a single place. Taizen then deactivates a trap. And a hole in the wall opens up. He says it was the only part of the wall that was made out of the trap wall, so he gave it a shot. He wonders what's hidden away in here. And sees a goblin on a throne. We learn it's the previous goblin Lord Hagia. Taizen's never heard of a named monster. Even Ark wonders why a lord class is here, saying they are the king of their race. Only one can exist at a time, and they transcend the limits and concepts of their race. Aga says he doesn't resent him, as he is just a toy being dragged around. But he's in existence given the role of a monster here. He lightly swings his sword, shattering some of the pillars around the room, telling Taizen that he is going to kill him. We see Taizen has avoided the attack. If it weren't for Deflect he'd have been dead as hell. He wonders what the attack was, then sees Aga going for a follow-up. Taizen quickly equips his sword and runs forward, clashing with Aga. He wonders why the hell he's so strong, as Aga effortlessly sends him flying backwards. Taizen manages to catch himself, and says his strength is 37, which is enough for the 50th floor in easy mode. Yet he is barely withstanding this. He realizes that he probably has an advantage in agility over Aga, so he closes the gap again. Aga says not bad, but he wasn't the first to have thought of that. Taizen activates Deflect again, but the attack still shatters through it and he feels the full impact of the attack. He begins to lose consciousness, but remains upright, and says he needs to hold on for 10 seconds. His vision is blurry, and he says it's impossible to react. He activates counter. Aga smirks, and we see he has 5 seconds left. Aga swings at Taizen, but he dodges the attack. It still causes him to fall to the floor, and he spam activates Deflect as he rolls across the floor to avoid Aga's attacks. He ends up taking 46 damage. After the 10 seconds are up he quickly rolls past Aga's throne. Ark calls out to him saying he needs to come back after getting stronger. Taizen says no, and he needs to continue. Ark tries to tell him that a lord isn't something he can hunt, and it won't be like Aga will go anywhere. Taizen says if he prioritizes safety he won't earn anything, and the moment he leaves the reward won't be the same, as the labyrinth rewards risky plays. That's why he will receive everything he can. Ark tells him he's being overconfident and reckless, and for someone who was so careful until now, why act like this? Taizen says everything thus far was for this, and he hasn't done this to avoid danger. He needs to risk his life in the challenge. This was all for him to increase his chances of succeeding. He begins to get stat bonuses for facing an enemy so far above his level, and he can see weak points. He says they won't have put something impossible in the labyrinth. He then says he hasn't moved yet. Taizen realizes that he's missing a leg, then begins to look around the room for a clue. Aga laughs, saying he's a brave warrior, he will respect him not retreating. So he will face him for real. He wonders how he'll approach him this time. Taizen activates Unbreathe, and swings at the wall, hitting it. Causing the building to shake, some of the ceiling begins to fall. Aga is amused, and uses his sword to block the debris. He says he's using his head, but the rubble is a double-edged sword. Taizen uses the purple mind controlly staff, and it begins to run a check on Aga. Taizen then uses a fire staff to shoot fireballs at him, along with arrows. The check fails, and Aga says this isn't enough to danger him. Aga quickly knocks all of the attacks away from him, but gets stabbed in the chest from behind. He asks Taizen how he avoided all of the rubble. He tells him it's a skill called Forced Battle. Nothing but Aga can hurt him. Even if the rubble is falling on both of them, Aga's ranged attacks still count though. But he wonders if the throne itself is an exception or not. He touches it, causing it to get sent flying. Aga laughs, saying that is very well thought out, and it's impressive. And he'll thank the gods that he was his final battle. Ark felt it, the Tizen he was watching until now has been using his stats to bully mobs, but now when faced with a real battle, he can witness his true battle IQ. Tizen rushes at Aga, and blocks his attacks, but it creates a shockwave. This launches Aga into a wall, who says if he can't get near him he won't be able to land the deciding strike. So he'll make sure that he can't approach a single step toward him. He launches an attack at Tizen, and Ark shouts asking why he isn't dodging. Then we see him just eat the attack, and taking fatal damage, but it activates Endure. Aga is confused, and Tizen kindly explains how his plot armor is too powerful for Aga. He rushes in at Aga and attacks him twice, then quickly chugs a potion and stabs through his shoulder. Aga knees him in the chest, shattering his sternum. But Tizen doesn't let it stop him, and he follows with a stab in the chest. Aga looks on in awe, then starts to shed a tear saying impressive. And a window appears saying he was victorious against the previous Goblin Lord. Tizen is gassed out, and asks if it's finally over. He leveled up twice from it, and received bonus skills related to the difficulty. We see his soul quality increases, and he received Aga's skill Power Strike. He says he didn't expect to get this skill so early, and he earned it in his past life from working really hard. He wondered what the secret reward would be, and we see it's a proficiency increasing potion. He also got a necklace with a 3-stat boost for all stats. He asks Ark why he's so quiet, and he says it's nothing. Tizen says he'll pass his old life stats before the 5th floor. He says this is truly the way to progress. Ark calls out to him, and says they should go down more. Tizen says he's gotta go up first to finish the quest. He goes back up to the altar of Lakiritas, and Ark is hiding behind him. A window appears, saying he's satisfied with his battle and wishes to grant a fitting reward. He asks him to be his apostle again, but he tells him he said no already. He receives a protective shield as his reward, and it's a skill. Ark says he's never seen it before. We see that its durability is linked to the player's health. He then has an idea, wondering if something is possible. The mist around the altar fades away, and he tells Ark he doesn't need to hide, but he says once he learns of what existence he is he'd feel the same way. On his way down to the 4th floor he says that Yun mentioned it being the orc floor. Every orc is strong, and they aren't dumb creatures either. He wonders how rough this floor will be. But before that, he sees the altar of Baal Thazahar. Bzar for short. Ark says that Bzar is the god of victory, but he's a neutral god. Bzar gives Tizen an offer for a trial, and he accepts it. Then it starts to read through his experiences thus far. Ark explains it's reading through his memories to decide his worth. Bzar proposes an empowered trial, and Ark finds it weird, saying there's no way Bzar would dislike him. But it'll be fine if he finishes it, and gods hate breaking contracts. Lakiritas is just a weirdo. Tizen accepts it, and begins to prepare a 20 versus 1. The area around the altar changes, and Tizen falls to the floor. He wonders what's going on as the entire labyrinth area begins to change shape, even RCS confused. And we see that it's changed into a straight line. Ark says that Bzar was involved in making the labyrinth, so it's entirely possible for this to have been done by Bzar. Tizen walks forward already, saying that nothing will change even if he decided to just wait. He enters the first room to see an orc with a sword. Tizen says he understands now what'll happen. He rushes forward, and blocks the orc's attack with his shield, but says it's fine since that's the protective shield health. He gets behind the orc for a follow-up, and says the orc should have been dead at this point, but now he's tougher. Ark says that the trial must be to fight one-on-one battles until the end, and they've all been strengthened so each room gets harder. Tizen stabs the orc in the chest, and it dies. Tizen says it's not that difficult, and Ark says that's to be expected with his stats, and they'll just get stronger as it goes on. Tizen says there are 9 rooms left, so I'm now confused on the 20 versus 1 thing. He quickly takes out another orc, which levels him up, and we learn he's only got 5 left. He says again, that maybe not right now, but later that might be possible. Again not saying what. In the 6th room we see him preparing to fight, and the orc lunges at him with a spear. He activates counterattack taking care of the orc. He then says that all of the orcs so far have been using a skill to swing their weapons. He's tried mimicking them, but it doesn't work. He wonders if it needs to be taught to appear as a skill. Ark asks if he needs swordsmanship. Tizen says he does, but why ask now? Ark quickly says it's nothing, and to get to the next room. We get some speedrun POV. He fights an orc with an axe. One that uses gauntlets, and the 9th floor gets off-screened. He finally makes it to the boss room, and wonders how he's meant to find the secret room if the dungeon is like this. He enters the room saying he'll figure it out later. And we see an orc wearing a gimp suit. He says the boss is the same as he heard from Yun. He hears sobbing, and looks over to see a mage girl crying to be saved. He compares her to a small animal. Ark asks why she's still here. And she recognizes him, then asks for him to save her. She says the labyrinth suddenly changed so she was forced out. When she woke up she was right by the boss. He quickly tells her that Tyson is the reason it's like this, and she is surprised, saying he looks like he just entered the labyrinth. He says he guesses the secret would be the NPC girl. She asks Ark if he'll be okay against the orc boss. He tells her it'll be fine, and he realizes the boss won't glance at anyone other than her. He decides to charge in and the boss swings at him, but he evades it. He activates Power Strike and slashes the boss, causing it to enter a berserk state. It screams and swings at Tyson, but he backpedals it. He activates Acceleration again to close the gap. Then activates Power Strike again, sending the boss flying. Ark and Mage NPC girl are surprised that he just one-shot the boss. But we all expected it, he is the main character after all. She says it makes no sense that a fourth floor adventurer can be so strong. She asks what he is and he tells her he's him. Then asks who she is. She looks at Ark out of confusion, then says her name is Lilies, and she's a magician. She entered here to learn more about the grand mysteries. She says he must have come from a world without magic, right? She says not everyone can learn, as it's an innate talent. She has no talent, but she desperately wished to learn more than anyone else. So she entered the labyrinth as it's a place she can achieve her dreams. She shows him a pretty magic scenery. He doesn't say anything. Then she thanks him for saving her, but says she has no way to repay him. He says there is a way. She tries to tell him she's broke, and he tells her that he wishes to learn magic. She tells him that she's sorry, but it's something she learned while risking her entire life, so it'll be difficult to grant him it. Tyson thinks about negotiating, but Ark steps in asking why she doesn't teach him. He says he understands that she has nothing but magic, and she values it heavily, but if it's for the cost of saving her life, surely it's fair. She says that's true, and he says it's not bad for her, asking how deep she's gone. She says the 9th floor. Ark says that's what he thought, whereas Tyson is someone who will probably conquer the labyrinth. Even the gods like him, and this floor is an example of that. He'll surely go to the bottom and save those in the abyss. And she'll eventually learn magic that she's not had the opportunity to do before. It'll be a good trade for both parties. He asks if this'll change her mind. Lily looks excited, saying she'll teach him. She says the future will be very fun, but because she was forcefully chased out from where she originally was, she can't teach him right away. She says she'll be in the secret room on the 6th floor, then she claps her hand and uses some kind of invisibility cloak like Harry Potter. Ark says he wondered how she passed through the floor unnoticed, and Tyson is surprised magic has such a use, and that Ark is randomly helping him now. Ark asks if he's not allowed to be nice. Tyson wonders what his deal is, but no need to guess because Ark says he saw potential in him, and it's for his self-redemption. But he doesn't want to explain any more than that, and he tells Tyson to hurry up and finish the rest of the trial. Tyson sits to eat for a bit, then it jumps to him informing us that Yoke and Yun both cleared the 1st floor. He starts to go through the loot he got, and we see the scroll of engravement, and finding Lily counted as finding the secret, so he got this. He puts it on his ceremonial sword, and it grants the sword a chance to knock back an enemy. Tyson is happy with it, then goes down to the 5th floor. He'll get a blade as a reward too. He goes back to Shop Gramps and he asks if the floor was chaotic. Tyson nods. The Shop Gramps hits him with the Resident Evil 4 line, and says he'll buy an inventory expansion ticket. Then spots a yellow potion on the shelf. He asks to see it, and we see that it's a powder from fairy wings. Shop Gramps tells him he doesn't know if it works as it's just a rumor. Some tried to bathe in it but instantly tripped before getting in, and others put it on their blades to make it sparkle. He wonders if nobody else knows about it, and he recalls how in easy mode everyone thought it was a trash item too. But he knows its use. He asks how many he has, and he tells him 3. Tyson says he'll buy them all and Shop Gramps is low-key dumbfounded. He hands him the bottles, and Tyson tells him he'll buy back, and Shop Gramps says he'll be waiting. Ark asks why he bought it, and Tyson says he'll see why in a bit. Czar then says he's looking forward to rewarding him. Ark chirps up saying it's impressive that the gods are willing to cut away at their influence to grant him favors. Tyson asks if it's that important. Ark is surprised he doesn't know, saying the gods only care about their influence. They almost never cut away at their influence, and they generally only give small rewards, So hopefully he understands how much value the gods are placing on him. So it's fine to be proud. Tyson says he doesn't feel proud. He's just clearing quests, it's nothing more or less than that to him. The first room of the 5th floor, we see an orc fighter. He says it doesn't matter if it's the boss of the 4th floor. Then attacks at it. It blocks his attack, but due to the scroll of engraving it knocks the orc back a bit. Tyson uses the chance of its balance being lost and activates Power Strike, along with consecutive attacks. The orc attacks back at him, but he blocks the attack and it knocks the orc back again. Tyson says that's lucky, then takes the chance to cut the orc's head off with Power Strike. Tyson is satisfied with how fast he killed it, and says if this is the first room then the last must be hella strong. We hear him fighting, but we don't get to see it. He's 5 rooms deep now, and he's excited about being able to learn magic afterwards. He asks Ark how he knows Lily. He says with maximum lifespans being gone he met her back when he first entered. She was about to die on the 4th floor, but he saved her. He asks how long ago he entered, and he tells him over 100 years ago. He's surprised she hasn't broken through the 10th floor in 100 years, nor has she learned any powerful magic. Ark explains how she entered the labyrinth even whilst being really untalented. She has yet to give up. He's surprised she's still alive. Tyson says there's probably a lot of NPCs that he hasn't met yet. It cuts to a rock falling in front of a goblin, and it's confused by it, then it sees another one roll out from the door. It's dumb, so it goes to chase it, and we see Yun is there and quickly assassinates it. He was just a little guy. She drops to her knees and we see she's wiped out a room of goblins this way. She's talking to Yoke saying that she lured them out one by one. He says including the time she planned to burn the boss alive. She's really good at this. He says he's found the altar of Lake Aradas, and Tyson quickly tells him not to touch it or bother with the boss. Yoke stops himself from touching it, saying he'll listen. They then thank Tyson for the help so far, and we see a man in easy mode named Choi Jaong Hyok. We'll call him Crop Top since he's wearing a crop top that is really high up. He tells everyone they are cringe, and stop with the exaggerations. Yun asks what he means, then it turns into a whole chat PvP section, about how they might just be lying about not having anyone in solo mode. Yoke starts arguing with Crop Top, saying he doesn't understand how hard it is for them to push forward. Crop Top asks why they even picked solo mode, if they are just going to complain. He says everyone is as quiet, except for the solo mode players, who won't stop yapping. He says it's been a month since they've started. Tyson is surprised it's been that long, but says it's around this time that easy and normal are done adjusting. But they become too complacent, which is like a poison. They begin to just release their bottled up emotions on others, and target the solo mode since they are the only ones chatting on the community board. He doesn't remember it being this body and the past, and wonders if it's because of Crop Top. During this time Crop Top is saying that the endure skill is just bullshit, and he's telling them all to die. Tyson scoffs, and says he remembers Crop Top from his past life because he kept arguing with him, and since Tyson isn't in easy mode he must have made a guild and began to control them all. People of the different modes can't meet in the labyrinth, and he's piping up because he doesn't think there will be any way to retaliate. But bro is missing vital information. Tyson says he'll see him in a month, and Crop Top is a bit afraid. It's the meme of the cheetah and its prey. He decides it's time to go to the last room, and we see him enter the boss room. We see it's an Orc chieftain, and Tyson is just happy that it isn't a lord. Ark says a vice chieftain isn't weak either, and most people struggle on this boss a lot. But of course the main character will be fine. Tyson nods, saying at least he knows. The boss then says, Grand Warrior, thank you for the fighting spirit, and though those called gods were useless, but this time it's different. His companions have already been defeated, right? Tyson nods, and says all of the orcs who fought him smiled in death, and they are more interested in battle than killing him. The boss says exactly, and there's no point in just killing him. They are just slaved imprisoned here, they don't know if they'll be free. But Tyson is granting them that along with one final battle, so he would not honor just stomping him. He will only let it be resolved with an honorable duel. He yells at him, saying to grant him a warrior's death. The bosses activates rage and charge. Tyson readies his blade, saying this is what he wanted. The boss gets off-screened, and we see him coughing, saying he didn't think their gap would be this wide. He asks Tyson if he's really only a 5th floor adventurer, since he's using skills as a sword art, and that he can tell how much experience he's accumulated by his moves. He says regardless it was satisfying, and an honorable death. He wishes Tyson good luck, then fades into light. With this he's completed Bzar's trial, and made him happy. He grants him a belt that gives him 5 health and mana each time he's victorious. and he obtains a skill called Proof of Victory, and it'll continuously increase one stat, so our boy is going to start scaling like crazy. He chooses mana as his stat to increase, then gets offered an apostle contract. He declines it, and Bzar says they are looking forward to meeting again. Taizen says the gods sure do give great rewards, then sees two chests. One is the normal reward, and the other is the secret reward. We see the sword has the same attack as his current one. And the second reward is called the Knife of Self-Harm, so if he feels emo one day he can take some of his health and store it for later. He indeed feels emo, then we see that it takes 20 health and stores it like a health potion. As for the secret room, we see a stealth robe that lasts only for 1 second. He whooshes himself asking how his Solid Snake cosplay is. Arc says it's good. Taizen says it's enough messing around and time to go. Arc says dual wielding is the move, and he did it for his sword art too. Taizen asks about his sword art. Arc tells him he made it himself using his Empire swordsmanship as its base, and he used to be called a swordmaster. Taizen asks if he can learn it, but Arc says he might die using it with his current stats. Taizen says his strength is around 150 though. Arc says that just shows that it's a high-level technique, but if he becomes stronger he'll teach him. We see the 6th floor is a swampy area, and he gets another scroll of engravement for clearing it. As he walks through it, he says it's just like Yun told him, and that moving around is tricky goop in the swamp. But that the monsters aren't affected by it at all. We see some lizardmen glaring at him from afar. But they screech and begin to charge at him. Taizen says this won't be a problem, and pulls out one of his staffs, and creates a firewall. It burns a couple of the lizardmen. He grabs one that didn't get burned by the throat, slamming it into the ground. He stabs it in the back. And he gains 1 mana from killing it. Arc says gaining 1 mana per kill is broken. Taizen says that just suits the main character. He sees a lizardman frozen in fear, and Taizen tells it to come here. The lizardman gets scared but gets off-screened. It jumps to later and he's easily bodying the floor so far. Arc says it's a bit boring. Taizen says it's normal for him not to struggle after what he's been through. Arc tells him to look at the wall. And he sees a mark that Lily left behind so he could find her. He touches it, and stairs begin to form, and go up the side of the wall. We hear Lily being surprised he's here and scrambles to go outside. She welcomes him to the secret room, then it cuts to her posing in a chair. Arc asks what she's doing, and she says that she just felt like posing as a great mage. Arc tells Taizen not to play along with her weirdness. Lily says that unlike skills, you cannot directly learn magic, and you have to receive it from others, or earn it from them. And things that aren't possible with skills, become possible with magic, like controlling flames or splitting space and so on. She makes a super smug face, saying if she's the one teaching him then that means he's her apprentice, so he should call her respectfully. Arc asks why she's being pathetic, but Taizen quickly says okay master. Arc barks at him to stop. Lily continues, and uses a spell asking him what he sees. He tells her that he sees a flame. She says that's what someone without magic ability would see. They'd only see the natural form of the mana, but since he came from somewhere without magic it's obvious he'd see this. She tells him that the way of learning magic is simple, he just needs to make a contract with the god of magic. In her case he came to her directly and granted it. Arc reminds him that this isn't normal, and the god only did it because Lily is a magic-obsessed freak. Taizen asks if that rule applies to him. Since he's already rejected so many apostle contracts, he doesn't want to accept any more. Lily says he doesn't need to, since he has her. She touches his shoulder, and a window appears saying the poor being who longs for magic is transferring magic, and he obtains it. Lily says those who know magic can pass it to others. It's an advantage of the labyrinth. A window appears saying he'll only be able to create sparks for now, and he's earned a couple magic-related skills. She asks him again what the magic in her hand looks like. He tells her that it's very different from before. He's just surprised since he's never seen this before in his past life. Lily tells him that now it's time for her to actually teach him various types of magic. She says the easiest method would be to extract the magic from something that contains it, like a staff. He pulls a couple out, and begins to extract the spells. He learns Fireball, and Random Mental Attack. We see the staff turn lifeless and break. And he activates Fireball in his palm. Lily tells him he's doing great. And that the other methods would be for someone else to teach the spell to you, or offer a tribute to a god and learn it. But the latter can only be done by a contractor, so he can't do it. But she'll offer the tribute in his stead, then teach him the spell after. He says that's good. She starts to wiggle with excitement saying she finally gets to learn new spells. He asks if he can learn the spell she is now, like invisibility. She looks nervous, saying yes, but it comes with a price. She says that she was taught those spells, so she can't just pass them on her own, and she needs to get the god of magic's permission. He says that means he just needs to get her to offer a tribute for him, and she nods, saying exactly. He asks her what he can offer, and she says that weapons and equipment work well, but something unique or special is generally the best. He starts dumping equipment from his inventory, asking about them. She tells him they'd work, but it's not enough for a single spell. He says there's quite a lot though. She tells him that in magic quantity isn't all that matters, and it needs to be something valuable. He asks her about his necklace, and she says since it's a lord's item he could get a beginner spell. He says that's a rip-off, then asks about Lake Aratas's blade. She says he'd like it, but wonders if he could actually handle the aftermath. Tyson says that since Lake Aratas is a psycho he'd probably like it. She asks Ark why he's so crazy. He then pulls out the wooden staff that grants 3 magic, and she says he'd definitely get a beginner spell for this. He asks how it's the same as a lord's necklace. She says that it's more so based on the items that are related to the gods that they prefer. He hands her the staff, saying to do it, and she claps her hands, then asks him what spell he wants, and pulls up some options for him to pick out of. We see Fireball, Frost Arrow, pretty self-explanatory, Basic Search, it's an upgraded version of his Detect skill, and Curtain, which helps hide his presence. And that the final one is Provision Production, and it can create water and porridge, but they don't taste like anything. He quickly says he'd like that one, and she's surprised he didn't take Frost Arrow. He says he can always come back later. Ark says it'll definitely taste better than goblin meat. She says alright then, and begins to cast a spell. Above her head is a green ball that turns into a cosmic eye. It begins to gaze down at Tyson, and laughs. We see the staff gets absorbed into the eye, then it vanishes along with the aura around it. He then learns the skill, and it has a 5 mana cost. She says that's surprising, and she thought there'd be difficulty in getting the spell. He asks why, and she says the gods are usually pretty fussy about people they haven't chosen, and that Ark had a hard time when he wanted to learn magic. She asks if he wants any more spells, and he says he does but has nothing to tribute. So he'll be back later. She says okay then, and she'll try to follow him down slowly, and to bring something good back. He says got it, and leaves. We see him walking through the swamp, and he uses Fireball. He says it's become more convenient now. Ark says the plan is simple now, just keep climbing down, and when he gets good items he can trade them for spells. He wonders what he's looking at, and we see his protective shield has gone up quite a bit. He tells him they should hurry up, and he's bored. Tyson begins to strip down, and Ark makes a goofy face asking what the hell he is cooking up. Tyson says he needs to get a new skill. Ark asks why he took all of his gear off, and Tyson tells him he has a reason for it. A lizard man looks over and sees him. He put a shirt on at least, but it recognizes him as defenseless and begins to charge him. It stabs at him, and he dodges, but gets grazed for 20 damage. He grabs its trident, then trips the lizard man. He earns a skill for receiving only half of the damage, and it's a passive skill called Sturdy. Ark is surprised, and now he's also got the first attack nullification skill. Tyson says if he has no equipment on he can't take damage. The lizard man leaps at him again and stabs him in the chest, but the attack is nullified, and Lizard Bro is confused. Tyson grabs it by the throat and yeets it into a tree, killing it instantly. He says he's thankful that Lake Aratas gave him that shield skill. Ark laughs, says that's crazy as hell. Tyson explains more about the skill, saying no matter what the attack is it'll just disappear. The damage isn't blocked or dodged, it's more like it never happened in the first place. And nobody can react to the skill. Ark says without the protective shield how would he have obtained it? Tyson says it would have taken him a long ass time. In his past life it took him thousands of attempts. He uses the emo blade to recover his shield, and he says it's good that the shield isn't considered as health, and now he's learned other skills too. Ark asks if he's going to keep clearing the floor, but Tyson says no since that's only of the first attack. Ark asks if he can actually earn it for the second attack, or anything else. Asking how it's possible when he just took 20 damage from the first hit, and the shield only has 35 health, saying it'd break through his defense. Tyson says he has this, and pulls out the fairy powder he bought earlier on. Ark asks what he's doing with that trash, as Tyson seasons himself. He empires the bottle, then opens a door, and we see him block the first attack, and Ark says he'll need to take 2 more for it to count as 2 attacks. Tyson gets hit and only takes 17 damage, and Ark says no way. Tyson says yup, big brain that shit, and how all checks are based on luck to a degree. Random damage has a range of 10%, So if the attack is 30% it can range from 27 to 33, which is just luck. He blocks the second attack, saying the fairy's powder helps control probability. So if he uses 3 of them then he'd receive the minimum amount of damage. He obtains the upgraded passive of blocking the first 2 hits. He dodges the next attack, and kicks the lizard man, and blasts it off like Team Rocket. Ark is surprised, saying he really uses anything he can to get skills. It jumps to a green beating heart, and then it gets pierced by 2 swords. It's a lizard man getting bodied. And due to hitting it in a vital point he unlocked a new skill. We learn he's killed quite a few this way and finally got the skill. Ark says it's good he got it, since it's a needed skill that can essentially triple your damage. Tyson heads to the boss door, and says there's only one thing left to do. Then he uses the provision production spell, and we see him eating some porridge he made. He then wonders if he can stack the random mental attack spell. Ark says yes, but it only works sequentially. Tyson looks at a fireball in his hand, and recalls him talking to Lily about how at the end of the day magic is considered a skill. She says it's a bit different, but for the most part yes. He says if that's the case then that's enough. We see him trying to make something with his fire, but fails. He says damn, and that it seems like he can't get it to change. Ark says that he's trying high-level magic out, and if magic could be controlled that easily they'd not have ranks. Tyson activates 3 fireballs in front of him. He throws it on the floor to form a wall, and wonders if he just can't learn skills with magic. Ark asks if he's tired, and he says nah. Then he says he can't get the fireballs to combine, and that they just stay side by side. This gives him an idea, and he throws one of the fireballs. He watches as it flies. And notices how its power is different when it's staying compared to flying. He has an idea. He recovers his mana. He throws one of the fireballs, then begins to run beside it. He manages to get ahead of it, then casts another fireball, and the first one flies into it. Combining them. Ark is surprised they can combine. He thinks that since it's considered a skill there's merit here. He casts another fireball, and combines them again. He does this over and over and over, until we see a giant fireball exploding on the wall behind him. Ark is surprised, as Tyson did something people thought to be impossible, and that he's learned a new spell called Fire Blast. It cuts to the 6th floor boss. We see it's Rock from Tower of God. Never mind, just a red lizard. Tyson dodges its attack and uses Fire Blast. The boss sees it above its head and puts his swords up to block it. Tyson says that won't work, then uses random mental attack on the boss, causing it to get confused. It snaps out of the first one, but due to them being sequential the second effect takes over. It begins to lose its mind as the Fire Blast comes down. He activates more random mental attacks, and the boss takes 50 damage twice, but recovers from the burn effect. Ark says it's sad, no matter how hard it tried the boss just couldn't get over the mental attacks and repeatedly being burned. We see the boss dead on the floor, and Tyson says that until now he thought magic would only be useful to support. But now he can probably break through with this. He gets a scroll of engravement, along with a staff of cold heart. It gives +6 to magic, and only cast 1 mana per spell. He also got a necklace that isn't as good as his current one, and he wonders if he has enough for a tribute now, so he plans to go back. Ark says and he thought they'd finally be descending too. It jumps to him holding out the necklace, and Lily begins to activate the spell of tribute, and now he obtains Frost Arrow. We see that she's in a tree now, and Tyson says he's surprised that these small safe areas even exist. She says that she's good at finding these places. He activates Frost Arrow and looks at it. Ark tells him that if he's thinking about that he can maybe do it with judgment. Of course they don't tell us what. Lily is confused by their conversation. Ark asks Lily to follow them outside, then Tyson shows her Fire Blast. Her jaw drops and she asks how the hell he learned a low rank spell like Fire Blast, saying for the last 100 years she's only learned invisibility. He asks if this is difficult to learn. She says yes, and that beginner spells are only easy since staffs can hold an imitation skill of them, but that isn't the case for the low level spells. She drops to her knees crying, asking how, and he says he'll teach her. A bit later we see that she's even more confused now. He asks if she can't do it, and she says of course not, since she doesn't have the body strength for it. She says regardless, now that she knows you can learn spells like this, she has a lot of ideas to test out. She says that she'll see him on the next floor, and he begins to descend down. We see his stats are looking crazy, and he's quite happy with it. He finally makes it to the 7th floor. Ark says every day their time together is getting shorter, and he should be able to learn his sword art now. Tyson asks if he's going to do that. Ark nods, saying he'll teach the imperial sword art of the Carvid Empire, and how they only deem power valuable there, and that the weak are considered useless. The imperial family is the same, and he fought with his brothers for the throne. Out of the 6 of them he's the only one left. Everyone in the labyrinth asks how one was supposed to survive in a world of such ambitious people, but that was his one and only world. Even if he wants to return he cannot. He can't save that world any longer. So even if it's just him leaving a trace of his world, it is his atonement. They enter an empty room, and Tyson says it's a good place to learn. Ark says since it's from his world, the emphasis for the sword art is strength, as they don't believe in true defense, as to them the best defense is offense. Since if you're constantly attacking it's hard for them to react, Tyson says he doesn't agree since many attacks can be blocked, so it's unreliable. Ark says the attacks are really powerful, asking if he still wants to learn it. Tyson smiles, saying there's no way he would refuse. Ark taps his chest, he says a surging storm, and scars that resemble the marks of powerful claws. That's the sword of the scarring storm. He loses his ghostly figure for a minute, and due to him having met the owner of the scarring storm, he obtains the skill for it. He fades back to a ghost, and Ark says to check it out. We see the proficiency is 0, and Ark says it'd normally be 100, but since he's dead he's only able to pass the skill down. But that he'll explain the best he can. He turns into a tier 9000 yapper and explains a lot. He explains to him how to position his body. Tyson tries it but looks goofy, saying his explanation is confusing. Ark gets a headache, saying just using words is hard. It's not that he doesn't have talent, but normally someone would explain while demonstrating but he can't do it, but Tyson doesn't have the experience yet. Tyson asks if proficiency is a form of experience, and Ark says yeah it is. Tyson recalls the proficiency potion he got, then drinks it. Ark wonders if it'll work, and we see that he begins to see the images of the scarring storm in his head, so yeah it worked. He grabs his swords and Ark watches at Tyson begin to perform the scarring storm arts, and begins to feel emotional, recalls him learning it in his past life. Tyson finishes the movements, saying he's glad it worked. Ark sighs out of relief that his legacy will be carried on. Then thanks Tyson, but he didn't hear it. Ark the little tsundere he is says they need to go. It cuts to Shop Gramps asking why Tyson is buying trash. We see it's a rusty sword, but he decides that Tyson has a plan. Tyson leaves, and we see him using the rusty swords. Guess he bought 2. Ark says that it's smart to buy bad weapons so he can make the fights last longer, thus increasing his proficiency faster. We see the lizard man preparing an attack, and the scarring storm arts flow to his head, letting him know the best way to handle the attack. He uses one sword to hit the trident out of the way, then uses the other to stab the lizard man in the throat. Then follows up with a double slash, and increases his proficiency by 1%. Ark tells him it was good, but he needs to move his wrist a bit more. Tyson says alright, while saying the fight would have been hard without the scarring storm, and he wants to break through the 7th floor like this. He gets into another battle. Ark gives some backseating advice, pretty much just coaching him while he fights so he can improve faster. We see Tyson sleeping, and Ark says that he said it before, but he's really unusual. He spends 12 hours a day fighting, and another 6 practicing his sword art. His only rest is when he's asleep. Ark sighs wondering how he's lived thus far, saying he's a training junkie. It jumps again to Tyson holding some rocks, then he tosses them into the air, takes a breath and then slices them all out of the air using the scarring storm. We learn it's been 4 days since he first learned it. Tyson says he can respond to his enemies now, but something feels missing from it. A lizard man appears on cue. Ark tells Tyson to close his eyes for this one. Then tells him to move forward 1 step at a time. He needs to empty his mind, and follow the path of the sword. Based on his own predictions, he needs to rely on his senses. We see he slashes at the lizard man, then he makes an X across his chest. We see the figures of some blue wolves charging at the lizard man. Then he pierces the lizard man 1 final time, and we see his proficiency has increased by 3%. Ark says that's the first form called Wolf Fang. He says that to learn the other forms they'll need stronger enemies. Even the 10th floor would be considered too weak. But it was impressive that he's learned the first form. We see his total proficiency is now 12%. It cuts to Yun eating what looks like goblin meat. She says that she feels hesitant to eat it, but the other rations are too expensive. She munches on it sadly, saying she missed Earth. She wants pizza or corn cheese. She really wants to return. She gets a lot of notifications that appear, and we see that 1 week from now she'll return to Earth, and if she survives Earth she'll get some rewards. She quickly posts on the community board asking if everyone else got it, and they all start to get hyped up to return. They seem really happy, but Yoke says he doesn't think it's a good thing. The rest ask how it isn't since they'll go back home. He says they seem to forget the reason they are here in the first place, is because Earth was overrun. They are smooth-brained. Tyson sees everyone chatting, while he's spamming Frost Arrow. Arc why he keeps looking over at the community tab, and Tyson says it looks like he'll go out soon. Arc asks why he wants to go where Broke is guarding. Tyson says not there, then throws his Frost Arrow at the wall, saying he'll see what he means soon. But starting now he's going to speed his clear up. Arc is lost. We get a rocky montage of him clearing the secret room, getting an agility rune. Then him clearing the boss, and that he got an earring of 10 mana, even though the reward was meant to be a necklace. He also got some new drip, and made a tribute to learn the magic basic search. Lily asks when he'll teach her new spells, and he says later once he learns more spells. Arc comments on him looking at the community board over and over again, saying he's definitely got an addiction. Tyson says he's just looking for Crop Top to speak up, but realizes that he's probably afraid since he never thought they'd all meet up. But he's really looking forward to meeting up. On the 8th floor we see it's full of birds. The floating islands are normal this time too. The main reward is something called the Rune of Marneus. A giant bird screeches overhead. Tyson leaps off a wall nearby to get up to the bird. He whispers sweet nothings into its ear, then stabs it in the back. They are called Marcandas. Tyson says they'll be quite easy to hunt since they are just animals relying on instinct, but he thinks due to that it'll be pointless to practice swordsmanship. He says since he was planning to speedrun he'll just practice something else. He uses Frost Arrow and Fire Blast to attack the Marcandas out of the air. He says it's convenient that he can kill so many of them in one go. He comes across the altar of Omaha. Arc says that he's the god of tests, and he enjoys watching adventurers find their true prowess. So he might be the best god for him to meet right now. Oman says he'd like to test Tyson. He agrees, then Oman begins to prepare something. Water begins to come out of the fountain and it creates a wall around him. Some goopy water comes out the water, it forms into a humanoid figure and goes toward Tyson. He decides to create some distance to see how it fights first, but sees that it's hella slow. He cuts its head off, gaining 1 agility. Then another one appears and he can tell it's stronger than the last one, but he kills it too. He says he understands now, that it's divided into levels. He gains 1 strength and Arc says that's right, and that each level is based on the strength of an average adventurer of their respective floors. So you can use this test to determine what floor you could reach with your current power. Tyson says this is convenient since he wanted to know too, some call it plot convenience. He clears the 3rd trial easily, gaining 1 int, then the 4th trial gives him 2 agility, the 5th is strength again, it alternates each level. From the 6th floor onward they begin to use skills. The one he's fighting uses a stab skill and Tyson replies by using Frost Arrow. It instantly kills the trial. He realizes after each trial his mana is recovering too. So thanks to that he can try various things. He uses Fire Blast to clear the 7th one. He says now it's on same level as his current floor, and he one-shots it with Frost Arrow. He says he's looking forward to the next floor, but nothing comes out for a minute. Arc laughs saying this is hilarious, and that Oman must have only received permission to test the adventurer to the floor they've reached. So if he wants to continue he must pay something in return, and probably feels like it's a waste to lose his influence for the trial. Tyson says none of the other gods were that way. Arc says that he wants to see his potential, but doesn't want to accept the loss either. Awkward silence ensues for a bit, then he says he'd rather just take this time to clear the labyrinth. The water shakes a bit, then Oman gives up some of his influence to offer an empowered trial. Arc is still laughing, and Oman asks Tyson to prove his worth. Tyson gets ready saying he's looking forward to see how strong adventurers of the other floors are, and we see that one of them spawn, charging at him. He uses Wolf Fang to stop the charge, instantly killing it. We see his soul quality increases from this. He says that's cool, then asks Arc what the hell these creatures are. Arc says they are in short, just shadows of various adventurers from the labyrinth, some who've died and some who just lost their souls. Another one spawns, and Tyson shoots Fire Blast at it, then dashes close using a random mental attack. He quickly pierces it with 2 Frost Arrows before the checks can run. With this he's cleared the 10th trial now. Tyson says he's glad they aren't just toys of the gods, and he likes how they all have their own individuality. Back to montage mode we see him fighting the 13th floor, and the 14th floor really quickly. He clashes with the 15th floor one, saying their stats are the same as his now. But he uses Fire Blast, causing it to create distance. He quickly closes the gap and uses Power Strike, killing it after catching it off guard. He says that even if their stats are the same, The cards they've been dealt aren't. He earns a whopping 15 stats and his soul quality increases. He says this is kinda broken. Saying he's gotten over 60 stat points already, Ark wonders how strong he'll have gotten after this. And we jump straight to him using Wolf's Fang to fight the 18th floor shadow, but we see it lives the attack barely, and leaps at Tyson. It grabs him and stabs him in the back, but of course it gets nullified. He cuts its head off, and Ark says that's such a cheat skill. On to the 19th floor, the shadow is using a great axe. Tyson blocks its attack, but it cracks the ground beneath him. The status window says he's facing an enemy that's impossible to beat, and he says the system must be bugged out. Due to him facing a stronger enemy, he activates all of his buff skills, saying it comes in handy especially for tough enemies. Tyson pushes the shadow back, causing it to use a skill called Assault. Tyson says the skill forces your body to twist and swing rapidly, but the weakness is that you cannot stop the skill, and it leaves your back open. He dashes behind it, then uses acceleration and power strike to stab it in the back, passing the 19th trial. He says it's going to get much harder here on out. The 20th floor shadow appears, and uses a skill called Absolute Victory. Tyson overcomes it with willpower, and they charge at one another. Tyson activates Deflect, but the attack still smacks him, causing blood to pour out of his mouth. He uses Madness, the random mental spell. But the shadow retaliates with Backlash, causing Tyson to fall onto the floor. He says it's a skill that knocks people back based on their stats. He learned it quite later on. He dashes back in using his acceleration and power strike combo. The shadow counter-attacks, dealing 210 damage. Tyson uses the robe to cloak himself, causing him to vanish. He appears behind the shadow and uses Wolf's Fang to kill it. Passing the 20th trial, it earns him 49 total stat points. Then he hears the next challenger, and sees an ominous shadow crawling towards him. It makes him tremble. Realizing that he's in danger, he grins, then tells Oman he's done. The trial ends. We see that his stats are nuts compared to what they were previously. Even Ark says it makes no sense that his stats would be enough for the 20th floor when he's only on the 8th floor. Oman shrinks his influence, granting him a reward. He obtains the Ring of Validation. It's 5 strength and defense. Then he gets a passive skill called Proof of Limitations. When facing an enemy of a similar rank, all stats increase. Of course, he's offered an apostle contract, which he declines. Oman spits water on him, then says they'll meet again. Tyson is glad that he's got the information that he could climb to the 20th floor as he is now, and says it'll be worth releasing the information on the community board. It jumps to him in the secret room, getting some cankle guards, and then to the 8th floor boss dead on the floor. Tyson says this is too easy. Ark says normally the mobs would have become stronger in the trial, but due to Tyson's soul quality skill being not balanced at all, it just made him scale way too much. We see the Ring of Marnus that grants an attribute to a weapon. He decides to put it into his inventory. Then, due to finding the secret reward too, he earns a skill called Exploiting Touch. It's just Life Vamp, so he heals for a portion of the damage he deals. He decides to speedrun more since he has 4 days until he returns to Earth. On the 9th floor we see armored hobgoblins. They dash in at Tyson, but he blocks them, and says this will be easy. Keep in mind he's still using the rusty swords that deal 1 attack each. He thinks about Aga, saying he was the previous Goblin Lord, but the current one is here on this floor. 3 days left. We see him in the boss room with the Hobgoblin Chieftain. It holds up a staff and Tyson just walks forward at it. Using the robe of cloaking, he goes invisible right in front of it, and effortlessly cuts its head off. He says time to keep going, and approaches a wall like the one that was with Aga. He disarms it, and enters to find the Goblin Lord Root Ra. Root asks if he's the one who beat Aga. Tyson nods and Root scoffs, saying because he fought a monster like Tyson he must have been satisfied. And he thanks him for that. Tyson says that he's the one who took Aga down from his position of Lord, so why he did that. Root says that he'll die eventually, so he wanted to leave an achievement behind. It's obvious that rather than dying a normal goblin, it'd be better to die as a lord. Tyson says it's just greed. Root stands up saying that he knew this day would come, but it's a strange feeling, but he has to accept it. He tells Tyson it's time to fight. They clash weapons with one another. Root begins to be pushed back, saying he sees that he cannot compare in skill, and to think none of his skills can match up is quite surprising. Tyson asks if he'll give up, but Root says hell no while knocking him backwards. He says that it doesn't matter if he has no chance to win, he will just do his best. Tyson says he'll do his best too, then charges in. We hear a loud sound, then see that Root being knocked into a wall, saying this was quite enjoyable. Then throws his weapons to Tyson. telling him to go ahead and leave. That was his final breath, and Tyson obtains the title of Kingslayer. It gives him more stats to those in a monarchy position. They head back to Lily and he obtains her invisibility skill. Then it jumps to him buying a ton of potions from Shop Gramps. He then heads down. He shows the 9th floor rewards, and they are boots that increases movement speed and action speed, and a sword with 11 attack. He finally makes it to the 10th floor, and we see it's rather empty compared to the other floors. Ark says soon it'll be over, asking if he remembers his quest. Tyson says of course, he just wants the boss dead. Ark thanks him, saying he's glad he left a trace of his existence with Tyson. Even with him being dead, and his world being ruined, leaving behind a trace is his role. It's unfortunate he couldn't teach him the second form, but he'll surely learn it on his own. Ark says he just wanted to say his farewells ahead of time. Tyson says nobody knows how things will end up, and he'll reply to that farewell another time. We hear heavy footsteps, and see the mobs on this floor are ogres. It swings at Tyson, but he grabs its finger and throws it into the floor. Instantly killing it, it jumps to him at the secret room. And he disarms a few traps to increase his proficiency by 2%. Ark wonders why Tyson is delaying the boss, as he just continues to disarm traps to obtain loot. He obtains a ring of 10 mana, then heads to the boss room. Ark says once he kills the boss, and enters the hidden room inside, he'll find the guy who killed him. He uses the rune of Marneus and scroll of engravement. He uses it on the Frostlight sword, which gives it a chance to slow the enemy after countering. Tyson confirms with Ark that he's an existence associated with the labyrinth. He says yes, and that he's tied to the grave. Tyson just allows him to follow him. Tyson says that's the part he's curious about, since he's tied to him with the quest. Tyson says as long as the quest remains, then won't he stay with him, then asks how he thinks this'll be judged. Ark asks what the hell he's talking about, and a rift forms in front of them. We see the pale blue dot that is Earth. Ark asks what's going on, and we see that it's time for the special quest on Earth. Ark tries to ask him about it, but Tyson closes his eyes and begins to get teleported to Earth. We're zoomed in to see a city, and Tyson opens his eyes. Saying it's the same spot as last time, Ark appears asking where the hell this is. Saying he's never heard of a place like this before. Tyson says he isn't alone this time, then it jumps to him entering a ransacked convenience store. He says it smells rotten, but it makes sense as it's been 3 months. He says at least the spam will be good, then grabs it and sweet corn. Then begins to cook it, using his sword as a grill. Ark asks if he really has to use that to cook. Tyson explains how when they return from the labyrinth they can bring things with them, which is how Ark is here. Tyson says he wasn't sure if it'd work as Ark isn't an item, but a living being. Ark tells him to forget about that, and begins to ask about the world. He's curious about the skyscrapers, and cars. Which makes sense as it's all a new experience to him. Tyson points up to a rift in the sky, asking Ark if he knows anything about it. Ark says he's not sure, asking what it is. Tyson says it's why he entered the labyrinth, as it just keeps pouring monsters out. Ark says he'd know better if he got closer. A monster attacks Tyson from behind, but he grabs the attack. He grabs the monster, asking Ark what he thinks it is. Ark gets close and says it's similar to a divine race, but it's also too different. He says that one thing is certain, and that whosoever owns the monster is a powerful existence, probably stronger than even Lake Arata's. Tyson says he sees, and burns it up. Ark asks if he only brought him with him to act like an encyclopedia, but says it's not a bad deal since he gets to learn about a new world. We see a window appearing, telling him to go to the city hall. Ark says that's convenient at least. They continue to walk through the city, and Ark comments on how empty it is. Tyson says that most people didn't choose a difficulty, and waited in hope for the government to rescue them. But of course it never happened, so there's just corpses all over. Ark asks why he's walking so slowly when his stats are so high. Tyson says he is someone he needs to meet. He asks if it's for Yun and Yoke the double Y. He says nah, and then we see a familiar bowl cut. He asks if he got the quest for City Hall. Tyson's eyes look happy. And we hear the bowl cut asking if he's from normal mode, and if he wants to go with him. Of course it's June, who we know from the start. Tyson is glad that he's alive, then grins. Saying sure, and they head off. June takes him back to some other adventurers. They are happy June is back, saying they are lucky nothing happened so far. June introduces Tyson, saying he's from normal mode. But some of the normal modes say they have no idea who he is. Ark comments on how they can't see him, and Tyson says he cannot recognize any of the other players. June claps his hands to get their attention, saying it's time to head for the city hall. He tells them not to be worried and he'll protect them all. They all seem relieved that he's a hard mode player. We see them all following behind June, and Ark asks why the hell everyone is so weak. He says at least June seems useful, but he won't be able to conquer the deeper floors. He wonders why Tyson went out of his way to meet June. One of the players point out a monster. I'm not saying its name because it's random numbers. June tells the rest to wait here. He readies his sword and walks out. Tyson says that the monster can be handled by even easy mode players since it's F rank. But that's only from the labyrinth's perspective, as the only ones who can fight right now are hard mode players. June kills it after a bit of a battle, and tells the rest they can keep moving. Tyson says his repeated for a bit, a monster would appear, June would defeat it, then the rest would wait for him. And if somehow another monster appears, it would be turned into a mist from Tyson throwing a rock at it. The rest would be confused, wondering where the monster went. June runs over gassed out, asking where the other monster went, and they say it suddenly disappeared. He thinks about how he's the only hard mode player, then wonders if it's Tyson. Since usually when he first meets people they are scared, but Tyson didn't seem fazed at all. He says the name is familiar too. He says no way, then tells the rest they need to keep moving. For the second time we're told this continued for a bit, June would handle the main monsters and Tyson would delete the others. Ark wonders what the hell they are doing. It angers him how the players are just sitting there running away. He calls them pathetic worms, saying it has to be a joke people like this enter the labyrinth, and it's an insult to all other players that they act like this. Tyson says he's glad that nobody else can see Ark. June consoles a woman crying about how those with her died. Ark gets depressed that these rats survived for so long. Tyson tells him to calm down a bit, and he's just an anomaly from Earth, and the rest all pick the easy mode. Ark asks what he means since only a single labyrinth exists. Tyson decides it's time to talk. He explains how the labyrinth for them are broken up into difficulties. Ark says that this is different than the labyrinth he knows, and maybe it was created artificially. He says since they probably didn't know how to create a labyrinth themselves, they just awkwardly attached it. This could explain the current situation. But with how it's set up, it would take a large amount of power, so why would they do it? Tyson says the enemies are definitely the same level as the gods, or maybe stronger. And it's odd, they keep sending F-rank monsters out, to gauge how they react, and that's definitely the behavior of a god. Ark asks if they can hurry up, since he's tired of seeing all of these players. Tyson says nope, and Ark starts pulling his hair, saying he sure like to help people. Tyson says he really doesn't. Ark brings up Yoke and Yun. He says that he only helped those with potential. Ark asks why June then. He says that he's someone he can be friends with, and he'll be there until the end. He doesn't care about the rest, but they'd probably affect June's mental. And in his past life, June also led people, but in the end he made it to the city hall alone, and it broke him. It cuts to later in the day, and we see some of the players eating monster meat, and talking about how bad it tastes. One of them suggests having brought stuff from the convenience store, but a rational one says the monsters might have chased them. They look over to see Tyson munching on some spam, and they talk about asking him for some. One of them approaches him, saying to hand it over, and if he's in normal mode he should recognize him. Some of the other players see him, and we learn his name is Changziok. He's from the Athens Guild. He says to hand it over unless he wants to get bodied in the labyrinth. Tyson laughs, asking if he thinks he'll even return to the labyrinth, since he knows the Athens Guild was wiped out on their second trip to Earth. Changziok starts to prepare an attack, but June asks him to stop. Changziok asks who he is, but June grabs his face while he's yapping, then lifts him off the floor and Changziok starts to regret his choices. June says he knows that Changziok doesn't respect him, but to not cross the line. He punches his shoulder, breaking his bones. Changziok falls to the floor coughing and screaming. June walks away from him, and some of the players say that he's scary. That night we see June alone by a fire, and Tyson walks up saying he's the one doing the most, yet they have him on night watch. He tells June that the rest are low-key afraid of him for what he did. June says there's nothing he can do about that, and something had to have been done. With this many people moving as a group, he needs them to understand they need to follow the rules. Tyson says there's only this many people due to June's efforts, but asks if he needs to go this far, saying he'd easily be able to make it to the city hall solo. Saying he should know that those who are fated to die will. Tyson explains how hard mode's survival rate is just 1%, and if you spend time there you realize that if you help those who have no future, you're just extending their pitiful lives by a little bit. So he asks why June obsesses over lives that'll die anyways. June starts to get up asking how he could say that. Then he notices that Taizen's gaze is that of one who has seen death countless times. He shudders in fear and grabs his blade, asking who he is. Taizen says that's the first time he's seen June have such a look, and he'll tell him once they reach City Hall. While leaving, June falls to the floor, wondering who the hell he is. The next morning June wakes everyone up, telling them they are only 2 hours away from the City Hall. As they all walk over, Taizen says there's a few things they overlooked. First, the monsters only attack people going to the City Hall. Second, those who went alone already died, or arrived. 3 monsters begin to charge at the group, and June tells everyone to run. This causes panic to ensue, and everyone is trying to push one another to get to safety. We see a kid, which seems a bit out of place. But June blocks for him, saying that the City Hall is right in front of them. He uses unbreathing attack, and begins to fight the monsters. He blocks one of them, then throws a bag of powder, that explodes into a barrier in front of him. He says it's going great and he just needs a bit more time. He happily turns around to see everyone standing still and he wonders why they aren't moving, but we see monsters behind them too. June begins to panic and his heart begins to race and he debates running away, since he should be able to easily escape without them all. He starts to vomit, since he even had the idea of running away, since they followed him. He says he wants to save them all, but doesn't know what to do. Taizen explains how June is a good guy, but not to the point of risking his life for others. He then asks June if he's going to run or not. June looks around, and asks if he'll criticize him. Taizen says no, he was just curious. June starts to cry since he really wants to save everyone. He hears the sound of fighting, then sees Taizen killing all of the worm things. Everyone is surprised by something, then we see a monster above Taizen. There's actually a few and they jump at him, but he calmly kills all of them and says they should keep going to the City Hall. They finally make it there, and some of the players wonder how such a large group survived. They then say it must be due to the hard mode player June that was with everyone. He tries to tell them the truth, but Taizen taps him and shakes his head no. So June goes along with it. Taizen heads inside, and says that the original population is 500,000 people, but it looks like only 100,000 survived. I don't know what this means, I've seen like a few hundred max. While Taizen is resting, June approaches him with water, and says he thought he needed to thank the solo mode chat. Taizen says he used unbreathing attack quite well. June comments on how it was only possible due to Taizen explaining how to earn the skill, and thanks to him he didn't have to leave everyone. Taizen says not to worry about it, and that it was June's idea to save them after all. June starts to tremble, then grabs his hand, saying he is truly grateful. Not only does he give them information, he also saved his life, and everyone else's. So he'll follow him without hesitation, and doesn't care if he gets used. Taizen throws the water at him, saying to just act normal. And June keeps it up. Taizen says he knew he was friendly, but this is too much. A woman appears saying she thought she heard June. We're introduced to Kim Huiyan, a hard mode player. Huiyan asks June who Taizen is, and he introduces him to her. She asks how he got so close, then says that it's fine if he hears this. She says there's 100,000 people here, but only 1,000 of them can actually fight. She sighs, saying most of them are from easy or normal mode, but the bigger issue is that they can't house this many people. She sighs again, saying that since they don't know when the quest will start, they need to figure out who is running things here. June says she should do it. She says that she was going to, but some freak wearing a crop top said he was going to run things. She chat PvP'd him asking how he'd manage that when he can't fight a monster. But he started talking down to her, and it turns out he has hostages. June asks who was caught, then we're told it's the double Y, Yok and Yun. Taizen wonders why out of everyone it was them. Huiyan says she's unsure, but they were already captured when she arrived. Taizen thinks about how their stats should be more than enough to body crop top, but there must have been a reason they didn't. Huiyan and June talk about just watching and see what happens. But Taizen steps forward, saying nah. He plans to clap this dude, and asks where he is. Huiyan says violence is a crime, acting like holding a hostage isn't. Taizen says he doesn't care, and that it's not like he needs permission. There are no laws anyways. She's clearly afraid of him, but stands her ground saying it's wrong to kill others. He says that she's the same as always, and he recalls how in his past life she tried her best to maintain order. And in their third return to Earth she died trying to save everyone. Back to the present, she's grabbing her blade saying she has a chance if she's lucky. But before she can react, he hits her in the back of the head, causing her to fall unconscious. June asks what he's doing, and Tyson says to enjoy the show. He readies himself, then dashes off hella fast, saying that it'll be the same for Crop Top this time around too. Who we see laughing, and carelessly enjoying his current power. Crop Top decides to give us a bit of some backstory, and we see someone begging him not to torment his family. But Crop Top says if they don't want to die then pay up. That was when the monsters started to appear on Earth. We see Crop Top running away from a slime, and another man saves him saying it's what they should do in a time of crisis, and Crop Top laughs saying of course. Then it jumps to him calling the guy naive and stupid, as he's killed him and taken his clothes. Crop Top says since there's no laws here he can act as wild as he wants. He'll win over the skilled players, and when there's a problem he'll get them to solve it with violence. He'll occasionally hand them treasures to shut their mouths too. Backstory ends, and he's laughing saying having everyone listen to him is exhilarating. Yun starts hard swearing at him, saying if he didn't pull the bullshit he did they'd have killed him, so don't get cocky. He laughs saying he knows they are strong, but the goddess of luck was with him. He was transported beside the city hall so didn't have to find any monsters. And most of the solo mode players were weak trash. We see him breaking a player's arm and enjoying it. He was shocked when Yoke and Yun arrived, but as soon as he held the player hostage they gave into it. Crop Top gets into her face, saying they should have fought him regardless of the hostage, and it's because they are naive and pathetic that they got outsmarted. He smirks saying solo players aren't anything special. Tyson appears in the door, asking if that's really the case. Then breaks his way into the room. Crop Top looks over to see him entering, asking who the hell he thinks he is. Yun instantly recognizes him, and Crop Top starts to realize that he's fucked. His instincts are screaming at him that he has to run away. Tyson gets closer, and he shouts saying to stop or else he'll kill all of the hostages. Tyson goes to say something, but Huiyin yells saying to wait. She wobbles into the room, saying that if he does that she won't remain calm. They ask what he wants. Crop Top sighs out of relief, saying he just wants safety and authority. Huiyin says that there's no way an easy mode player should have the authority. Crop Top brings up a good point saying even if they are strong, do they know how to lead? He says he's got plenty of experience, and surely they won't ignore that. She can't say anything. Crop Top starts to laugh, saying he's already got them under his control, since they don't want to harm humans. Tyson says there's a limit to his delusions, and before he can react his controller is taken and broken in front of him. Crop Top starts to panic since his eyes couldn't even react, and he falls to the floor as Tyson stands over him. He reaches into his pocket, and clicks a button that causes the floor to collapse, and steel beams to fall towards Tyson. June and everyone watch on in fear, and Crop Top starts to think that he won already. But of course Tyson took 0 damage from every single steel beam, and begins to crawl out of the rubble. Crop Top yells and tells all of his boys to get in here and take care of him. We see them appear, and they begin to ready their weapons. Tyson draws his too, and Huiyin tries to stop him. But he says that he knows what she's feeling, but there's no need to protect these kind of scumbags. He instantly kills every single man that came out, and Crop Top is petrified. Tyson says that with this many people Yoke and Yun would have lost, but that isn't the case for him. It cuts to outside, where it's peaceful and the players are talking while Ark relaxes. Then their peaceful is interrupted as they hear crashing and they look up to see Tyson holding Crop Top by the head, dangling him over the ledge. Ark flies up saying he's finally doing something interesting. Crop Top is struggling to not fall, and manages to keep himself balanced with his foot on the ledge, asking why someone like Tyson exists. Tyson says he's so pitiful, and he's had to kill him twice. Crop Top asks what he means, but before he can say anything else his head is popped like a zit. He says both deaths were the same, then lets his limp body drop to floor. The players below watch as he hits the pavement, and start to scream about how Tyson killed him, calling him a murderer. Tyson wonders how he dealt with the backlash last time. He recalls having to go deeper into the dungeon to actually beat them. But this time it was easy. June walks over saying that it'll be a bit difficult, as Big Huiyin and the rest are saying things about him. He says it's fine, and soon they won't have the time to chatter about it. Some old dudes say they refuse to sit still, and must bring him under justice. They keep complaining to Huiyin, then she slams her hands onto the table, saying Tyson fought so many players by himself, would they even be able to punish him? One of them cleared their throats, saying that it makes sense she doesn't know what to do, being so young, and they can't let the world be led by those with strength. She realizes that she can't talk to these idiots, and she has to quell her anger. She thinks about how nobody would even be able to punish Taizan, and they'd stand no chance if he decided to fight them. But she fully understands that these old men just want to reclaim their old authority back. She wonders if Taizan saw her this way too. Then a window appears, and they all see that the first wave is starting. And it says to defend the 4 cardinal directions around the city hall, and to defeat all the enemies. Some players run in, and ask Hui and if she saw the quest. People start to panic and she says to remain calm until she thinks of a plan. Then she sees all the old men have already run out of the room, which pisses her off. Taizan trusts her to hold that side, saying she did it in his past life. Then Yun and Yoke approach Taizan. Yoke thanks him, and points out Ark asking what the hell it is. Ark says hello idiots, and they realize he's from a quest. Ark says he refuses to give it to them. Taizan stares at Yun, which makes her a bit nervous, and he recalls her in his past life, and she asks why he's staring at her. He says it's nothing, and it's nice to meet the two of them. He tells them they have 12 hours remaining, so he'll train them until then. He tells them to draw their swords. He tells Yoke that he's too bold, and that Yun is too scared. He doesn't want to see them die alone, so he wants to help. He challenges them both to battle, saying he can't answer questions if they have any, but this'll help the two of them understand the level they are at. Yoke says that a fight against him would be meaningless. Taizan says this skill will match his stats to his enemies, and he won't use his skills. He won't let him decline either. Yoke accepts it, and Yun asks him if he's insane. He realizes it's an opportunity to prove himself. So he's excited, and since their stats are equal he has a chance, or so he thinks. Taizan tells him whenever he's ready he can start. Yoke charges in and swings at Taizan. He blocks the hit, then turns his blade to push the sword down, then runs his blade up and cuts Yoke's arm twice. Yun is shocked, and so is Yoke as he realizes he's actually bleeding. Taizan says to continue, but Yoke is just getting one-sidedly bodied, without a chance to fight back. Taizan tells him to accept the fact he's weak. Yoke grits his teeth, then swings at him. But Taizan hits him 4 times instantly, causing him to fall to the floor. He puts the sword by his face, and he looks up. Taizan says that his sense, decision-making, target priority, all of it has a vast difference on physical performance. His strength will only suffice on Earth, and to survive in solo mode he's lacking too much. Truth be told, it's because he never even heard of him in his past life. Yoke says that makes too big of a difference. Taizan encourages him to get up and keep facing it until he actually understands, since after all, it is only the beginning. 30 minutes later we see Yoke gassed out. Taizan asks if he understands now. And he says yeah, and it makes him feel useless. The duel ends, and Yoke feels hopeless. Taizan says that having confidence is good, but don't let it turn to arrogance. He looks at Yun, saying now then, and she says that she understands already how weak she is, and is scared. He says her issue is something else, and to get ready. He tells her just to try and react. She screams and holds her sword out. He hits it and she swings it away. He uses the force to fully spin around and backhands her, but she manages to block it. Then pushes him away. Yoke says it looks like she's panicking, but she's actually blocked all of them. Yun starts to rush in for a follow-up, but Taizan grabs her shoulder and throws her to the floor. He asks her what she thinks, and says she's not as weak as she believes herself to be. But that doesn't mean she should become cocky. He tells them it's time to end this session. But he'll teach them skills and methods of attacking the upcoming floors. He explains it to them until the end of night, and he says they can tell others if they want, but just don't die. They look confused about something. He asks what's wrong. Yoke says he just seemed sweet for a moment, and they thought he was cold-hearted. He says if that's the case, would he have taught them anything to begin with, and to go ahead and get inside. They start walking, and Taizan looks to show there is 6 hours left. We see Hui going crazy over trying to plan, and Taizan asks her what's happening. She turns around to see him, asking when he got in here. He says it'd be best for her to close the windows, asking what the current situation is like. She is surprised, but quickly explains it to him, and since it's difficult for everyone to move while inside the building, he wants to have everyone exit before it starts. But there are too many people who refused, or got angry saying they refused to fight. He sees she's stressed, then tells her she can leave one of the directions to him. She asks if he'll be fine, and he says yeah. She thanks him, and he raises the window saying no problem, and they'll meet again after they survive. It jumps to the wave about to start, and the south side has Hui in a group, west has June in a group, then east has both Yoke and Yun. And of course the Chad is alone north side. The rift begins to open wider and monsters can be heard inside of it. Tizen says it's starting, and the quest begins. The ground begins to shake, and the players see a wall form and they wonder what it is. We see it stretching far out. Then the rumbling continues, as it's being caused by the hordes of monsters swarming them. The players begin to run and scream, and they start to panic since they can't run away due to the wall. Huiyan sees them, then tells them to come back and prepare. They ignore her, and she starts to fight. We see a player on the floor as a monster slowly waddles to him. It stretches its tentacle out, attacking him. But the player quickly realizes that it only did 7 damage. A sword kills the monster, and Huiyan tells everyone to stop being afraid, as they don't do much damage. So just fight back. The players begin to realize they'll get rewards based on performance, and it's doable. They nervously stare at each other, then charge in and begin to actually defend. Huiyan sighs out of relief, as they are actually helping. On to Yun and Yoke's side, they are effortlessly destroying monsters, and the players with them comment on how strong they are, but they both say they are nothing compared to Tizen, who we see facing a horde of monsters. He charges in and makes light work of them, leaving nothing but their bodies in pieces to fall from the air. Ark says there's a lot of them, but they are way too weak, so how would anyone struggle with this? Ark is confused why the quest isn't over, since Tizen's cleared his entire side. He says the others are still fighting. He touches the wall, then punches it. Saying he thought it wouldn't work, Ark says it's suggesting he not interfere with the other directions. Tizen says yeah, and he'll just wait. We see the South group has finished their fight, and start to celebrate. Same with West side. June is smiling. They say they can finally rest, but then it says the second wave will now begin. They are confused, but another rift appears. We see a single monster, and they start to get cocky. June tries to tell them to wait, but they rush in saying the rewards are theirs. A man stabs at it, but realizes he did 1 damage, but it's too late as he gets turned to a chew toy. It bites his head off, and the other players wonder what happened. The creature begins to wiggle around, then lets out a loud roar. It sends players flying, and even kills some of them. June tries to tell them to stop running, as if they show their back they'll die in vain. Then he instinctively dodges the attack, and turns around to see the other players got turned into meat crayons. June wonders how the hell he's meant to win against this. On Tizen's side we see he killed his in seconds, and says that it's too cruel, as we see other players huddled in fear by the wall. He says he should do what he needs to, then begins to run along the wall. Since it doesn't stop him from going further into the territory it's covering, he heads to another rift and instantly clears it out, saying he thought this was the case. A new quest appears to destroy it, and he says if he's successful the number of mobs will decrease. He stabs it, and a wolf monster appears. He says it's D rank. The beast takes a deep breath, then exhales with a roar, causing Tizen to distance a bit. He says it's hella loud. He explains how they can tell ranks based on the numbers in the monster's name. The lower the number the stronger it is, and since it's a 6-digit one it's D rank. And this monster alone in his past life almost brought humanity to extinction. It was only after his 3rd return last time he could beat it. But now it's different. He charges in and activates Wolf Fang. He hits it twice for 136 damage. It counterattacks at him, and he smashes him into the floor. Tizen says it's no use, and grabs onto its paw. He nullified the attack, then stabs it and freezes it with Frost Arrow. He leaps overhead, then readies his sword, but the beast opens its mouth to go for a bite. But he uses his legs to keep its jaw open, stabbing it in the throat. He activates Fire Blast down its throat. The beast begins to roar in pain. He gets knocked back a bit from it throwing him off, but he says this is very manageable. An hour later we see that he's finally killed it, and had to drink a potion. He readies a Frost Arrow, shooting it into the rift, which causes it to break and shatter. He says now he's done everything that he had to. Ark is confused as the same notification about the special quest appeared twice. Tizen says it means the other side is done too. Ark is a bit smooth-brained. We see Huiyan panting and covered in blood, and she says that it's finally over. He looks around to see tons of bodies, wondering how many people died. It took a few hundred deaths, before those running away realized they had to work together to escape, but it was too damn late at that point, and they were weak. She starts to regret her strength, saying if only she had more. The walls finally begin to vanish, and she realizes that she needs to go help Tizen since he's alone. She starts to run, but quickly realizes her legs have no strength. Tizen appears, and helps her not fall over, saying he finished his side, and it looks like she's improved a bit. She comments on how he's not even scratched, yet they struggled so much. He tell her they should have also tried their best in the labyrinth. They get a window saying they'll get their rewards and return to the labyrinth in 48 hours. We learn over 70,000 people died from that wave, and she Huiyan says it'd be better if Taizan lead everyone. He says nah, and she can keep doing it. He tells her to just understand saving everyone isn't an option. Then some players call out to her, asking what they should be doing now. Taizan tells her that she needs to get accustomed to death, and she looks sad. She starts to give a speech to those around her, saying many lost their lives, and without law and order many more may die tomorrow. But that's just the world they live in now. Things aren't over though. Which is why they need to do their best to survive. For those who've passed on, and to uncover the truth behind this, they must all return stronger than last time. It cuts to Yok and Yun running to Taizan. And he asks if they'll be split up again. He says yes, since it's solo mode. But he'll see them next time. Yun says they'll surely meet again, right? Yok lightens the mood saying next time he'll win the spar. Jun and Huiyan appear. Jun say he'll work harder to be like him. Huiyan also says they'll all meet again. Taizan says those are his words to say, and they need to get way stronger. Then he enters the rift, and we see a blue aura surround him just like the first time he entered the labyrinth. And just like that he's finally returned. If you've watched till the end, comment, Eagle, to let me know. Subscribe for more videos like this, leave a like or a comment to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.